Totally wrong facts that people still believe. The lightning lie. Have you ever been sat inside your house looking out the window, admiring the thunderstorm happening outside? During one of these storm watching sessions, you would have at least at one point witnessed a lightning strike. Something that is quick, loud, terrifying, and also beautiful. But on top of just the raw beauty and power that lightning beholds, there is also so much mystery associated with it. More specifically, how lightning seems to never strike the same location twice. Obviously, we all know the fact that lightning never strikes the same location twice, right? We've heard it all growing up, we've heard it as adults, and even today, this fact is still parroted continuously. But what if I were to suggest that this fact that you and I were told, and potentially even still believe, was actually not the case whatsoever? Despite what you were told growing up, lightning is not nearly as calculating or as picky as we may have once thought. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. The reason that we even have lightning in the first place is because during thunderstorms, static electricity will build in these massive storm clouds. And it's the creation of that static electricity that separates positive and negative charges within the clouds. When the imbalance of both of these charges becomes strong enough within the cloud and are actually able to overcome the air's insulation, a giant spark of electricity is released from the cloud, equalizing the charges in the cloud and then grounding itself on the ground. And this flash of electricity you see is, well, of course, lightning. In reality, it's kind of like a storm cloud busting a nut. You see, certain storm clouds are just so hot and bothered. The only way that they can equalize themselves or the charges within themselves is by releasing something hot and electric. And in this case, it's lightning, aka cloud nut. And after the flash of lightning leaves the cloud, it becomes equally charged once again. The question still remains, how do clouds pick exactly where they want to strike their lightning or blow their electrical load? You see, lightning is not picky, it's lazy. And like water, electricity is seeking out the least path of resistance so it can as quickly as possible neutralize itself and, well, kind of die. Which is a bit morbid, but the truth. I mean, lightning is not trying to exist. It is an expression that is actively trying to neutralize itself, which is kind of sad. Sad nut. But yeah, in all seriousness, lightning does strike the same place multiple times, and in some cases, tens of times every single year. And in most cases, the easiest place for lightning to strike is a location that is high to reduce the distance it has to travel, or a location that is, well, conductive. And it's for that exact reason that lightning rods are installed on basically every skyscraper you will see anywhere. If lightning truly never struck the same place twice, lightning rods would be an obsolete object because, well, after it was hit once, it would surely never be struck again and just be obsolete. But as we know, that is not the case. The Empire State Building in New York, for example, is struck by lightning 25 to 30 times every single year. And that, of course, is just one of the many skyscrapers in New York City. Outside of skyscrapers, though, other locations that are likely to be struck by lightning numerous times per year are tall trees, mountain peaks, radio towers, and any other location that is both conductive or at least somewhat tall. That is, if it's available to the storm. You see, if a storm takes place in a wide open field with absolutely no extra conductive point, lightning will still choose the path of least resistance, but in that case, it might just be a random spot in that field. But yeah, I thought this was kind of a great first entry for this video, simply because if you look at any skyscraper, the existence of a lightning rod makes this wrong fact almost completely obvious, yet this wrong fact is still so ingrained in pop culture and, well, folklore today. This wrong fact or myth is so popular, for example, that it's actually used as a metaphor. People will literally tell each other, hey, don't worry about it, lightning never strikes twice, as a metaphorical example to help cheer someone up who's going through a rough time, suggesting that because you're going through a rough time now, it's very unlikely that you'll be going through another rough time or the same rough time again. And while that is a wholesome metaphor, it has unintentionally caused millions of people to believe complete lies about lightning. And well, if we actually wanted to make this metaphor more scientifically accurate, it would be a lot more, well, morbid. Because if you wanted to give advice based off of scientifically accurate lightning, it would go something like this. Hey man, I know you're going through a lot right now, but I just wanted to remind you, some places will never get hit by lightning, statistically speaking. And some places will get hit by lightning a lot. And because you've already metaphorically been hit by lightning, it's very likely that you're going to be hit by lightning a lot. Maybe up to 25 to 30 times per year. So you're either blessed or cursed depending on how tall and conductive you are. When you make the metaphor more scientifically accurate, it's a lot less heartwarming. And honestly, I just find this, well, wrong myth so ironic because, scientifically speaking, if something does get struck by lightning, it's because that location is an ideal place for lightning to strike, meaning that that location is much more likely to be struck by lightning again, making this wrong fact not only incorrect, but actually the opposite of the truth, at least in some cases. But yeah, lightning is cool, but it's not picky. And if we've learned nothing else from this section, it's that, sadly, lightning's sole goal in its nanoseconds of existence is, well, self-destruction, which is sad. But now you know the truth. Although in some cases, the truth is just a reminder that sometimes ignorance is bliss. The oxygen epiphany. Have you ever been on a nature walk, surrounded by trees, walking on a trail, and just felt so in awe of the beauty surrounding you? The wood chip trail that guides you, the squirrels running in the bushes beside you, and of course the tall trees towering over you as you walk. I don't know about you, but it's almost hard to not appreciate trees every time you leave the house. They're by far some of the biggest and most important plants in the entire universe. But what if I told you that they weren't as important as we thought? Now, before you get your pitchforks and torches up, let me just make one thing clear. Trees are extremely important and should be protected. There's nobody doubting that. But I would argue that trees get a bit more credit than they're deserved, and the real unsung hero of oxygen production is, well, a bit underappreciated. Let me explain. If I haven't made it clear enough yet, the reason why trees are so amazing is because they produce oxygen. They literally take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and produce oxygen in which we breathe. That is undoubtedly a blessing and reason enough to protect trees at all costs. But while that is a fact, the impact that trees make is likely less than you believe. I would argue that if you asked most people, they would say that trees likely produce at least 50% of all of the world's oxygen. And I would also argue that it's likely not a small percentage of people that believe that trees are the sole oxygen production system on the entire planet. And while those aren't inherently wrong things to believe, they're not exactly true. You see, forests, and particularly rainforests, contribute massively to the Earth's oxygen supply. But that massive amount is not 100%, it's not 75%, it's not 50%, it's not 40%, it's not 30%, it's actually only 28%. Which, while still vital, is probably less than most people thought. Which begs the natural question, okay, if trees are only producing 28% of the Earth's oxygen supply, where does the other 72% come from? And the answer is actually right under our noses. That's right, mustaches produce 72% of global oxygen. So next time you see a man with a mustache, thank him, and maybe even give that mustache a ride. Oh my god. No, okay, that was a dumb joke and obviously a lie. The other 72% comes from ocean plants. More specifically, microorganisms, like phytoplankton. And of course, regular ocean plants like kelp and algae and other stuff like that. Through photosynthesis, all of these relatively small and in some cases microscopic organisms actually play a massive impact on the world's global oxygen supply, which is a big reason why I wanted to shout out the world's unsung hero of oxygen production, the oceans. That being said, I definitely don't want to take anything away from trees, although it's important that we give the ocean its spotlight too, because they are a massive contributor that I think most people aren't even aware of. At a first glance, it's kind of hard to believe that microscopic organisms are giving trees a run for their money in terms of oxygen production, but when you start to consider how much of the world is actually covered in ocean and how little of the globe is actually covered in forests, it starts to make at least a bit more sense. And I don't have the answer to this question, but I'd be curious to see which of the two actually offers more oxygen per square foot, a square foot of ocean or a square foot of forest. Because I feel like there may be a per capita thing going on here, but I honestly wish I had that answer. But yeah, so the wrong fact that most of you likely believe is that trees produce all or even most of the oxygen we breathe, when in reality, that's actually not the case. They make a big impact, but the impact they make is dwarfed by the impact that the ocean makes, which is interesting. And I guess since we're talking about oxygen, I have another bonus wrong fact, because it really isn't long enough for its own section. I think most of us know at this point that we don't breathe in pure oxygen. The air we breathe is a cocktail of a bunch of different gases. But obviously, oxygen is the primary gas present in air, right? Well, that's actually, once again, a wrong fact that you likely believe. While oxygen is massively important to the air we breathe, it, similar to trees, is a relatively small percentage of the total pie. The air we breathe on average is roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.9% argon, and then 0.04% other gases, such as carbon dioxide and variable amounts of water vapor. So yeah, trees don't make all the oxygen, and air isn't fully oxygen. And these two facts don't make trees or oxygen any less important. They just make you more informed. Boop. Now let's move on. The spider swallowing shame. I don't know about you, but if you had a childhood similar to mine, then you had a kid in your school who always said the most random stuff. And I remember vividly being on the playground, minding my own business, when this fact-sharing weirdo walked up to me and told me the following information. Did you know that you swallow up to 8 spiders a year in your sleep? At the time, I had no reason not to trust this individual, and I was appalled by the information he was telling me. And instantly, I almost felt like I could feel spiders crawling in my mouth, and I felt truly disgusted. The kid who shared that information with me walked off casually as if it was no big deal. But I was shocked, and for weeks after that encounter, made sure I fell asleep with my mouth closed. And it's my personal belief that being exposed to this information is a canon event for at least some of you watching this video. And even if it didn't happen in that way, I would guarantee most of you have heard or potentially even believed that, yeah, you swallow up to 8 spiders per year or per decade or per lifetime in your sleep. But of course, if you're watching this video, this fact is not true whatsoever. You see, in reality, the only people that are really swallowing spiders are circus freaks and Mary Jane. And yes, I understand the irony that I have become the adult version of this fact-sharing weirdo on the playground. But at least I'm cool about it. Like, I don't make it weird. Or maybe I do, but I mean, you're watching it, so somebody likes it. Regardless, let's get to the bottom of this totally wrong fact. As far as the origins of this myth go, it's really not certain. And it's kind of believed that this myth was perpetuated online as sort of a shock or a gag and just kind of gained more traction than it should have. And while the virality of this shocking fact has infected at least most of our minds by now, the reality is actually much less disturbing. This fact, or really myth, actually goes directly against both human and spider biology. Let's start with the spider biology. At least in North America, there are only a few species of spiders that even live inside the average household. And every single one of them is either found in their webs or hunting in a place where humans are not found, at least not commonly. That fact alone makes a spider appearance in your bed already extremely rare because, well, your bed offers no prey for spiders to hunt. And a bed is also a place where you are often, so unless you are not in your bed a lot and your bed is full of bed bugs, it is very unlikely that a spider would willingly go into your bed. But we're only just getting started. On top of your bed being a barren hunting ground for spiders, it is also believed by biologists and arachnologists that spiders are terrified of sleeping humans. Specifically because sleeping humans create a lot of vibrations, something that spiders are super sensitive to. Just think about it. Your breathing, your heartbeat, potentially even your snoring and other things could be causing a lot of vibrations. And while it might not seem like much, it's these micro vibrations either on the ground or on the wall that cause the spider to sense danger and leave that area alone, creating only another reason for a spider to leave your bed and you alone. But yet, we're still not done. Moving over from spider biology to human biology, we have a lot more to discuss. First and foremost being, most people do not sleep with their mouth open. That one factor alone basically demolishes any chance of a spider getting into your mouth and into your digestive tract. But even if you did sleep with your mouth open, that doesn't necessarily mean that spiders are just making their way in there. Obviously because of the reasons we discussed. But even on the off chance that a spider did find its way into your mouth, it is supremely unlikely that your natural reflex would be to instantly swallow it. And it is much more likely that in this unconscious state, your natural reflex would be to get it out, either by blowing it out, spitting it out, pulling it out, or something like that. Once again, obliterating this totally wrong fact. So yeah, if you were paranoid that you were swallowing spiders in your sleep, just remember that for that to even happen once, let alone 8 times a year, you would need to A, have a spider that was for some reason wanting to go out of its normal home or hunting ground, B, have a spider that was brave enough to try to climb you or at least land on you in your sleep, you would C, have to be sleeping with your mouth wide open, and you would then D, have to have the very unlikely reflex of swallowing the spider whole while it's exploring in your mouth. And with all of these very unlikely situations having to take place for this myth to be true, it becomes very obvious to see how this fact is actually fiction, which in this case is very good news. The dog debacle. Have you ever been out walking your dog, maybe you're on the beach or maybe you're enjoying a sunset, only to realize, wow, my dog isn't able to enjoy nearly as much beauty as I can right now, because obviously my dog can only see in black and white. And I, a human, am seeing a full spectrum of colors. While this realization may be upsetting, it fortunately isn't really the case. Let me explain. It's been long perpetuated now that dogs can only see in black and white, similar to an old school television. And I know for a fact everybody watching this video has at least heard that, or potentially even believed that, or still believes that to this very day. And while this was a genuine fact at one point, because that's what scientists did believe, there is in the modern day a lot more nuance to the situation that I think a lot of people aren't privy to. Back in the day, veterinarians used to believe that dogs couldn't perceive color because every time a veterinarian would ask a dog, "What color am I holding up?" the dog would say nothing, obviously indicating that the dog could not decipher color. I'm just kidding, that's obviously not the case. While it is true that we can't ask dogs what colors they can and can't see, we can use biology and science to draw logical conclusions, which is exactly where the nuance comes into play. Recent studies have suggested that dogs don't have black and white vision, but they also don't have full color vision either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. Dogs only have roughly 20% of the cone photoreceptor cells in their eyeballs that humans have. But that doesn't mean that they're only seeing in black and white. What it means is that dogs see the world in more basic colors, specifically yellows, blues, and grays. And this sort of color blindness that dogs have is known as dichromatic vision, and is relatively similar to red-green color blindness found in humans. Now, interestingly, because of this scientific discovery made in dogs, there was actually a TV show made specifically specifically with dogs' vision in mind. And I'm sure some of you have even thought of this or are even actively writing a comment about it right now. That TV show is called Bluey, and it's a kids' TV show where all of the main characters are dogs. And interestingly, the main color palette of the show is made with colors that are perceivable to dogs. Not necessarily so it can be watched by dogs, but I think it's just kind of a cool nod to dogs in general. And maybe it's for dogs as well. I honestly don't know. You guys let me know. But an interesting irony about this color blindness that dogs have is that if you get them a bright color toy, you know, that's red or orange or any obvious color that they should be able to see, it's actually something that they are likely not going to be able to perceive, which is ironic. But just because dogs see differently than us doesn't mean that their vision is inherently worse than ours, because dogs actually do have a couple vision benefits that humans lack. More specifically, dogs have much better vision in low light settings, and their vision is much more precise when it comes to motion detecting. Obviously, two key elements that are beneficial when surviving a night in the wild. So while your dog may not be fully able to appreciate a rainbow, their unique vision has definitely evolved over time to help them become the fluffy friends that we know them to be today. Bullsight bullshit. Since we were on the topic of animals and vision, I figured this would be a perfect follow-up. We all know that bulls become enraged when they see the color red. It is their nemesis, their antithesis, their chiropractor, it's their arch enemy, right? Well, by this point, you know that's obviously not the case. And the reason why I wanted to discuss the eyesight of bulls directly after dogs is because, well, once again, there's some nuance to it. You see, for the longest time, it was perpetuated through cartoons and media, and even traditions that bulls become enraged or aggressive or triggered by the color red. If you see any matador waving a red flag or any cartoon involving bulls and people, it's hard not to assume that red is the trigger that sets these bulls off. But in reality, it's actually not the case whatsoever. Similar to dogs, bulls are colorblind, and it's believed by biologists that bulls cannot distinguish the color red from other colors like green or gray. Meaning that it's literally impossible for red to be a trigger for bulls because they can't even see red in the first place. And the real thing that irritates and triggers the bull is the movement of the flag. The way that it ripples and moves catches the eye of the bull and eventually causes it to charge. And the true reason why the cape is red is honestly morbid and truly disgusting. The red color is there not to trigger the bull, but to hide bloodstains. And while I do understand how the sport has some cultural and historical significance, I would personally argue that this activity is no sport and has no place in the modern day. But that's just my opinion. Not to be disrespectful, but personally, I do see this activity as truly barbaric. And I do think it's possible to appreciate its historical significance without continuing to participate in something that is, well, in my opinion, so cruel. But I'll get off my soapbox. And no, before you ask, the reason why my hat and shirt is red is not to hide blood, no matter what the government says. But yeah, bulls aren't triggered by red. They literally can't even see it. Let's move on. The shark tail. Since we were already talking about animals and unfortunately talking about blood, I figured this would be a relevant section to transition to. If you're going to an ocean, it is paramount that you make sure you have absolutely no wounds on your body, because it is said and believed by many that a shark can smell a drop of blood from over a mile away, and in some cases, multiple miles away. This is a fact, and of course, everybody knows it. But what if I told you, once again, this wasn't the full truth? First, let's start by separating fact from fiction. The fact of the matter is yes, sharks do have extremely good smell. And their noses are even full of special sensors that are called olfactory bulbs, which are extremely sensitive to chemical compounds present in water. And it's because of this that it's believed that a shark's sense of smell is so good, in fact, that some species of shark can detect blood in concentrations as low as 1 part per 10 billion. But if that's the case and true, then wouldn't that just prove the fact that yes, sharks actually can smell blood from a mile or miles away? Well, not exactly. In reality, a shark's sense of smell is really only effective at a relatively short distance. And this distance can be influenced by a plethora of factors present in the ocean, such as water temperatures, water currents, and turbulence within the water caused by other living creatures. But on top of these natural factors affecting their sense of smell, 2 other major factors are the type of blood that is at play and the concentration of other chemicals in the water at the time of this smelling. But on top of the effective range of a shark's nose being much shorter than what's presented in most media and pop culture, the reality is, even if a shark could smell blood from miles away, they wouldn't instantly just lose their mind and begin searching for miles to track down the source of that blood. And that's because most sharks sharks are not just mindless killers. Sharks, as a rule, are very particular about what they eat and for the most part prefer seals and other fish. And on top of that, if a shark is not currently hungry, they have no reason to search miles for simply a small trace of blood. The truth of the matter is that yes, sharks have amazing noses, but no, it's not necessarily effective at mile-long ranges. And even if they did have that effective range that everybody claims they had, they wouldn't necessarily just instantly begin tracking every source of blood down they could find. Although, that does make for a good movie premise. But I guess speaking of premises, if you guys like the premise of this video, wrong facts, then feel free to leave a like or leave a comment on this video letting me know that you want a part 4. This is the 3rd installment of the Wrong Facts series, and so far you guys have loved it, and honestly, I've had so much fun making them. My goal is just to make videos you guys want, so your feedback is appreciated and noted. And I guess if you haven't yet, consider subscribing, because right now we are on the road to 2 million subscribers. But shilling aside, let's get to the last entry of this video. The hyperactive hoodwink. We all know that if you give a child sugar, that is a recipe for hyperactivity and bouncing off the walls. You don't need to be a scientist to prove that sugar makes kids extra hyperactive. It's just a fact that I think most of us have observed, either secondhand or possibly even firsthand, being that hyperactive child. Now, what if I told you that while this phenomena is definitely real, the reasons for it are not what you think whatsoever? Hopefully you'd believe me because, well, obviously that's the case. I would argue that sugar making kids hyperactive is probably the most believed myth on this entire list. And that's because there is definitely anecdotal evidence to prove that. But as I stated, the reality and the actual science behind the situation is not what you'd expect. For decades, it has been observed and believed and expressed that sugar instantly makes kids hyperactive. And because of this, the scientific community decided that this was something worth looking into. And what they found not only didn't validate these claims, but actually discovered an entirely new reason for this hyperactivity. Scientific studies that have taken place on both children and adults, including large-scale reviews that have been published in medical journals, have found no evidence directly linking sugar or hyperactivity, once again, in children or adults. And the theory that the scientists came up with at the time of the study was that it wasn't necessarily sugary foods that was making kids more energetic, but it was the environment where kids were typically ingesting sugary food. That being birthday parties, family get-togethers, holidays, and other exciting events where kids are naturally more energetic. Now, interestingly, more recent studies have actually gone on to further validate this, claiming that the alleged sugar high that children experience is not actually biology, but expectation-based. In one study, scientists gave the child a sugar-free soda and told the parents that they had given their child a regular soda. After the child had consumed the soda and both the child and parent were left alone, almost every parent believed that their children were more active or even hyperactive, even though they had consumed 0 sugar. And the scientists claimed that this was being caused by something known as expectation bias, a situation where your belief is formed by what you think is going to happen rather than what actually happened. Interestingly, that study happened in the 1990s, but studies on sugar and hyperactivity are still going on to this very day. And in 2019, another study was able to go on to confirm that there was once again no effective change on behavior in children that have been consuming a lot of sugar or a little sugar. And modern studies have even gone on to show that there is actually a reverse correlation between sugar and hyperactivity, claiming that sugar may actually lead to tiredness or reduced alertness because of the massive spike and crash in blood glucose, leading to irritability and fatigue, not hyperactivity and excitement. But yeah, even though it kind of seems like giving kids sugar is basically like giving them literal crack, the reality is actually far more complex and nuanced. And if you really wanted to prevent your kids from just running around, don't reduce their sugar intake, just give them an electric shock and then go on to lie about it. Forbidden places you will never visit. Just imagine you're on a fishing boat in the Bay of Bengal. You've had a successful day and it's time to get back to shore, when all of a sudden a typhoon forms right in front of your face over the water. And before you know it, your boat has been flipped and you are essentially lost at sea. Your entire crew is gone and you're holding onto a floating board for dear life. Your energy is low from kicking and screaming, and you pass out, clinging to this board. You wake up later, looking at a clear sky, and you notice you're not in the water anymore. You're on the beach, but you don't know what beach you're at because you weren't near land. You cough up some water and start to sit up when you realize a small bunch of blobs in the distance. You see them approach and you realize that it's people, but not people you've seen before. The closer you get, the more you realize that these people are barely clothed and wielding sticks and bows. Did you time travel? Unfortunately not. You have just washed up on North Sentinel Island. North Sentinel Island is the first location on this list, and it is likely one of the most well-known forbidden places in the entire world. Oh, and as far as the fisherman who washed up on the beach, yeah, his skull is now a pendant for one of the Sentinelese people. North Sentinel Island is one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian archipelago in the Bay of Bengal. which also includes some other smaller islands as well. What makes North Sentinel Island so unique is the fact that it's solely occupied by a voluntarily isolated indigenous tribe, who are believed to have been there for over 60,000 years. These people are known as the Sentinelese, and they have made their wishes known by force, specifically by killing anybody who tries to contact them or even come close. They have made their message so clear that the Indian Navy patrols the area around the North Sentinel Island to protect it from people trying to enter it. And the Indian government does not prosecute any Sentinelese people for killing people that try to step ashore. That's insane that this uncontacted tribe is essentially immune to the law. The Sentinelese have not only attacked people that have stepped on shore, but have also repeatedly attacked approaching vessels, whether those be fishing boats or simply any sort of low-flying helicopter or plane in the range of their bows and arrows. The story I told at the beginning of this segment is actually inspired by real events that took place in 2006. During this time, Sentinelese islanders killed 2 fishermen whose boat drifted ashore. And like the intro story, this approach wasn't even intentional. Although, speaking of intentionally visiting the Sentinelese, in 2018, a 26-year-old man named John Chu, who was an American Christian missionary, tried on 3 separate attempts to visit the North Sentinelese people, likely to convert them to Christianity, but unfortunately on his 3rd trip, which he was successfully able to approach these people, he was unsurprisingly murdered, which is obviously unfortunate. But this young man was warned by the Indian government and other authorities. In 1956, there was an Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes regulation that was put in place that restricted any approach closer than 5 nautical miles, which is essentially anywhere within a 10-kilometer radius of the island. The biggest reason why this regulation was put in place is to protect the Sentinelese people from mainland diseases. Due to the severity of the isolation of North Sentinel Island, they have almost no immunity to any modern-day disease or germ that may be on you or I right now. So if you were to visit North Sentinel Island, there's a very likely chance that even spending time around them, breathing near them, shaking one of their hands, could lead to the death of the entire population of the Sentinelese people simply by spreading germs. North Sentinel Island is a forbidden location that I personally don't intend on breaking any rules to visit. But what if fishing wasn't your speed? Perhaps you are more interested in agriculture, specifically Chinese agriculture. The year is 1974, and you are simply on your farm. And what's a good farm without a well? So, you start digging a well. However, this day was different. As you start digging, you notice something that is about to uncover one of the largest excavation projects of all time. And then you go deeper and you notice hardened fragments of terracotta. And then you notice bronze arrowheads. And then terracotta bricks. Well, in that case, you just discovered the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first Qin emperor of China. These artifacts were submitted to the government, and shortly after, archaeologists arrived. And although they were curious and interested about the artifacts that may have laid underground, they were not at all prepared for what they were about to find. What they found was a massive necropolis, the size of a small city, with a plethora of artifacts, weapons, vehicles, and most famously, terracotta soldiers. There is estimated to be over 8,000 terracotta soldiers in total, but that actual figure is unknown because this mausoleum is still not fully excavated and may never be. Keep in mind, this excavation has been going on since 1974 and still continues to this day. This mausoleum was built from 246 to 208 BC. The mausoleum mirrored the city of Jianyang with an inner and outer city structure. And although this outer and inner city structure where the terracotta soldiers have been found has began to be excavated, one place that has never been touched was the tomb itself. This tomb is at the very center of the complex, and it is very large. In case the thousands of terracotta soldiers were not enough of a sign, the late Qin Shi Huang did not want people entering his tomb. At least, not without a fight, I guess. So I suppose that begs the question, why did the government keep excavating? Well, the 3 reasons they listed publicly were the following. One was the fact that this area was a seismic zone, and they needed to remove these historic artifacts to protect them. The next reason was for tourism, to potentially make it something that people could visit and appreciate. And the third reason was to prevent grave robbing, essentially theorizing that if they didn't take it, somebody else would. In case the 8,000 terracotta soldiers didn't make this obvious, this mausoleum is massive. The replicate inner city is over 2.5 kilometers in circumference, and the outer city is over 6.3 kilometers in circumference, which is insane for a mausoleum. Even the tomb itself is massive. It's believed to be 80 meters east to west and 50 meters north to south, and 15 meters tall on the inside. However, the interior height is debated. It is a very real possibility that we will never be able to know what's inside the tomb, simply because of limitations in archaeological abilities, specifically the risk of destroying so many other artifacts just to get inside the tomb. But we do have historical accounts of what is said to be inside the tomb, which is the following. The emperor's tomb is surrounded by rivers of liquid mercury, which was the emperor's immortality elixir of choice. Which, just quick side note, yeah, this emperor was literally drinking mercury to try to extend his life, which ironically ended up causing him to go crazy and die. But okay, back to the historical account. There is a domed ceiling representing celestial bodies made from pearls and precious gems. The floor has a design of the entire map of his empire. And besides all of his precious belongings and stunning architecture, there was of course claims of booby traps, specifically crossbow traps that would be activated if anybody tried to enter the tomb, which would result in them, of course, being shot and killed. Here's where things get interesting. These accounts were of course questionable, and archaeologists were suspicious. But after probing the soil near the tomb, it was confirmed that the mercury levels in the soil were 100 times over the normal level, giving some credibility to these historic claims, which also gives credibility to the fact that there may be booby traps, which has essentially spooked archaeologists, as they believe these traps would be fully functioning, which I personally find hard to believe, but I also wouldn't risk it either. This tomb is listed as a World Heritage Site and is therefore protected by legal entities. But that's not the only reason why you're not able to go here. Unlike North Sentinel Island, which is relatively easy to visit if you have a boat or know somebody with a boat, the tomb of Qin Shi Huan is simply unable to be reached, at least to any regular person with reasonable means. What I mean is, of course, if you hypothetically had a bunch of dynamite, you could blow it up, but obviously that's not realistic. Or is it? No. Unless... Just kidding. Therefore, you're not only not allowed to visit it, you're also not able, making it a perfect entry for this list. Let's hope that you got your sea legs back, because we're hitting the water again. This time, we're going to a remote island intentionally, although it's not off the coast of India. This island is actually in the Arctic Circle. This island is known as Spitsbergen, and it's tucked away in the Arctic Svalbard archipelago. And if you're wondering why we're going here, it's primarily because of your passion for agriculture. Spitsbergen is the home of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, and this seed vault is one of the most interesting places in the entire world, and is kind of an interesting take on the Doomsday Vault. In short, it's an ultra-secure facility with the sole purpose of being a safeguard for global crop diversity by storing duplicates of every known seed. This place is really just a sperm bank for plants, or other stuff like that. The Seed Vault is actually a partnership between the Norwegian government and Crop Trust, which is a genetic resource center, which sounds evil, but probably isn't. But it might be. This facility is epic, and if you like brutalist architecture, you are going to love this building. It's essentially a concrete slab sticking out the side of a mountain in the middle of an uninhabited Arctic wasteland. To me, it seems like a pretty cool place to store some stuff. The entire facility goes almost 400 feet into the side of a mountain, and a majority of this facility is kept at negative 18 degrees Celsius, as that is the recommended temperature to store seeds. I guess, I don't know, I'm not a seed expert. One unique failsafe about this facility that I think is pretty cool is the fact that even if all the refrigeration units failed today, the seed vault would still be completely protected because it is stored within permafrost, meaning that it's very well insulated and very cold. Now, if only the people that designed this designed the Death Star too. As of 2022, there is over 1.2 million unique types of seed in this facility. And interestingly, and potentially somewhat obviously, this facility is not manned. It is autonomous, and I suppose that's a good thing considering the fact that it's literally in the middle of nowhere, always kept at deadly temperatures with basically nothing around you. This seed bank is a really unique modern invention that I think serves a genuine purpose that hopefully we will never need, but could very well serve a massive role in the development of humanity if it ever came to it. I think it goes without saying that this seed vault is completely off limits. Not only is it in an extremely remote location in a part of the world that's already hard to navigate and travel to, but the facility itself is extremely secure. So unfortunately, you won't be able to check out the cool seed collection, but that's okay. And you're a person of culture. Modern archives and architecture is cool, but you want history. You want to see some cool stuff. and some old stuff. And for that exact reason, we're going to France. The date is September 12th, 1940, and you and your trusty dog are on a walk like any other day. Your dog notices a hole left by an uprooted tree, and you notice something rather interesting, but you don't bother at the moment. You go home and ponder on what you may have saw and decide that you have some unfinished business, and you return to that uprooted tree with 3 of your best friends. You begin digging, a common theme in this video, I suppose, and notice that this uprooted tree has a lot below it. Specifically, a 15-meter deep cave shaft. You and your friends are brave, and you enter the cave and start exploring. And not only do you see some cool stalactites and stalagmites and light brights, but you also see interesting designs on the walls. Those designs were ancient cave paintings depicting animals. This cave is known as Lascaux Cave, and it is a network of caves in southwestern France with over 600 cave paintings found on the interior walls of its caves. It is suggested that these paintings were not made all at once and that they were the combined effort of many generations. And although they haven't been able to quite pinpoint a date for each and every one of these paintings, the general consensus is that these paintings are anywhere from 17 to 22,000 years old, which is so cool. There was an amount of time where this cave was actually open to the public for tours, but over time, due to carbon dioxide, heat, humidity, and other contaminants produced by the 1,200 visitors that visited these caves a day, the paintings were essentially disintegrating and were being visibly damaged. Therefore, the cave was closed to the public in 1963. Since then, the paintings have been restored to their original state and a monitoring system has been put in place. It's actually just a baguette holding a door closed. I don't know, I'm sure they've got something amazing. So yeah, unless you're able to travel at least 70 years into the past, you're not going to be seeing these original 22,000-year-old paintings. However, this story does have a bit of a happy ending, because obviously there was demand for these cave tours, and that wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. So what the authorities actually did was create exact replicas of this cave system for people to explore and visit without any risk of the originals being damaged, which is honestly pretty cool. But what isn't cool is snakes. And since 2 out of the 4 entries on this list so far have been on islands, let's add another one to the list and combine the 2. Snakes in an island. You know what that gets you? You're right. Snake Island. No, not the island boy's haircut. Snake Island is an island, I know. And it is also off the coast of Brazil. The island is famous for, of course, its large population of venomous snakes, specifically the golden lancehead pit viper. And what's interesting is that this island is the only known natural home for this breed of snakes. But there is a bit of mystery surrounding this island. How exactly did these snakes get here, and why is there so many of them? It's not called Snake Island because there's a few. It's called Snake Island because it's only inhabited by snakes, and a lot of them at that. The island is roughly 106 acres in area, and is believed to be the home of around 400,000 snakes, although that number more recently has been debated. But if you ask me, I don't think we're getting an accurate head count anytime soon. Point being, there is a lot of snakes on this island. But the question remains, how did these snakes get here? And I hope you brought your tissues, because it's kind of a sad story. Basically, when the Portuguese colonized Brazil, the Portuguese made all of the native Brazilians disown their pet snakes. Obviously outraged, the native Brazilians didn't give up their snakes without a fight, and they banded up all of their snakes and sent them off to sea on a raft, hoping that they would find a better life. After a few days, this raft of about 500,000 snakes washed up ashore on this uninhabited island, and the rest is history. I totally just made all of that up. The real reason why there is so many snakes on this island is much more simple. During the last ice age, this island, which is now 33 kilometers off the coast of Brazil, was actually connected to the mainland. But near the end of the ice age, as water levels started to rise, the snakes essentially became trapped on this island. Their population grew due to a lack of natural predators. Fortunately, these snakes weren't the only animals on the island. There was actually a plethora of ladders, but unfortunately, after a few dangerous games of snakes and ladders, only the snakes remained. I don't know why I'm lying so much in this video, but hopefully you can tell fact from fiction. Sure, there's a lot of snakes on an island, but there's a lot of snakes on a plane too, and people are still on the plane. Why is there not people on this island? Well, similar to North Sentinel Island, Snake Island is off limits to any civilians. The Brazilian Navy claims that this is for the protection of both the snakes and the people that may potentially try to access the island. The only people that are advised advised to go on the island have to be vetted by the Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, which I'm assuming is no easy task. And if you try to go the other way, well, you'll have to deal with the Brazilian Navy. And similar to North Sentinel Island, if the snakes kill you, the Brazilian Navy is not going to put them in jail. That's crazy that now twice on this list, there is groups of people that are immune to the law simply because they got an island. I wonder if there's any more recent examples of people with islands breaking the law. That's an interesting phenomenon, but let's keep moving. Wait, okay, last thing I'm gonna say about Snake Island. Making fake maps claiming that there is buried treasure on this remote island, when in reality, it's actually just Snake Island, would be a hilarious prank. Not in the modern day, but definitely pirate times, dude. This was a pirate time banger of a prank, guaranteed. You know what? We're on the topic of islands. Last island, one last island for the list. Palette cleanse, we'll go through it quick. Morgan Island. No story, no nothing. Just straight up facts. Morgan Island is also known as Monkey Island, and if you can't guess why it's called that, you may live on Monkey Island. Monkey Island is famous for, of course, its population of free-ranged monkeys. It is completely uninhabited by people, and this island is protected by the Department of Natural Resources and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which use it for public health research, which unfortunately is basically just animal testing. Boo. Monkey Island, unlike Snake Island, is not naturally occurring, and actually has a very odd origin story. To put it bluntly, there was a lot of monkeys in Puerto Rico that were carrying hepatitis B, and it was becoming so much of a problem that there was frequent outbreaks. So what is the most logical and reasonable next step? Well, according to some people in 1979, the best idea was to capture 1,400 monkeys and relocate them to a remote island in South Carolina. And ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Island, aka Monkey Island. So in case you ever wanted to be surrounded by over 1,000 monkeys with hepatitis, Morgan Island definitely needs to be on your travel wish list. But you don't just want to go to remote islands full of uncontacted tribes or a plethora of dangerous animals, and you don't want to go to rural China. And you don't like the cold, so Norway's out too. Well, if that's the case, then I have one last location for you. And if you're a Reddit meme lord, then you're going to be right at home. This last forbidden location takes us to a salt flat in the middle of Nevada. The salt flat is known as Groom Lake, and what makes this salt flat relevant to this video is what's built on the salt flat. That being a Nevada test and training range. But there's military bases everywhere, so what makes this one so special? This test and training range is home to one of the most popular and highly classified United States Air Force bases, most commonly known as Area 51. Interestingly, Area 51 was never considered a secret base. However, it is the home for some of the most secret and sensitive documents that pertain to military intel in the United States. The origin of the name Area 51 is actually unknown. However, according to the CIA, the proper names for the facility are Homey Airport and Groom Lake. The primary initial purpose of Area 51 was a testing ground for Project Aquatone, the development of the Lockheed U-2, which was one of the most iconic spy planes of all time, and still has a lot of mystery surrounding it, almost 70 years later. Since then, this area has gained a lot more popularity, and due to the secrecy surrounding it, there has been no shortage of questions, mysteries, and conspiracy theories surrounding the happenings of this military base. Obviously, with the most famous examples being its affiliation with aliens. I honestly wish I had more to talk about, but facts about this location are kind of hard to come by, and I don't think I need to explain why a military base with sensitive information is off limits. But I do find it kind of interesting that, although this is a perfect entry for this video, it's a bit of a catch-22, because for any random civilian, Area 51 is a place you will never even get close to, at least not alive. But for hundreds of people, this is a place they come every single day. It's their job. But that's a different story. In 2019, there was actually a large movement for people with way too much free time to storm Area 51 to get answers and see an alien for themselves. This movement was heavily meme-based, but was still very real. On the night of the actual event, over 1,500 people showed up at the border of Area 51, primarily partying and enjoying the scenery, although some took it more serious than others. At the end of the event, nobody got in, surprisingly nobody died, and 7 people were arrested. It was a mostly peaceful meme, but I'm sure when all of this was gaining traction and popularity online, some government employees were definitely starting to sweat a bit. The craziest urban legends you've never heard of. It's the mid-1980s, and you and your friends are stumbling home after a long night of drinking. You're walking through the dimly lit streets when you notice something in the distance. Your friend is joking with you and talking about how wasted he is, but something catches your eye. You see a woman on the other side of the road and you recognize her from inside the bar. She appears to be using a payphone, but it's not quite working. As you get closer, you stop your friend's rambling and ask him if you think you should see if she needs help. Your friend says to leave her alone, but you have an odd feeling. And before you are even close enough to yell across the road, asking if she needs help, you notice a car drive up. An ambulance. But this was no regular ambulance. This ambulance was unmarked, fully black, with dark tinted windows. The ambulance pulled up right in front of this woman at the payphone, and almost as quickly as it appeared, it drove off. And you notice the woman was gone too. In this instance, you have just witnessed another victim of the black ambulance. The black ambulance is an urban legend from Czechoslovakia and Romania that became popular in the 1980s. And the story claimed that a mysterious black ambulance with tinted windows and no markings would roam the streets at night, abducting people, particularly people that were alone and vulnerable. Witnesses who alleged to have saw the black ambulance said that they even saw people be forced into the ambulance and even heard cries for help from within. This interesting legend spread quickly through word of mouth, which fueled local rumors, which then spread to nationwide media. The fear of being targeted by the black ambulance actually caused people to be more vigilant and take extra precautions when going out, specifically at night. With this being an urban legend, there is no concrete evidence to support the existence of the black ambulance, but there is numerous reports made stating a sighting or even an abduction done by the ambulance. The exact origin of this urban legend isn't fully known, but it's suggested that it may have been a manifestation of the social unrest in Czechoslovakia at the time, which is now obviously the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Personally, I think the black ambulance is the perfect urban legend because it's just on the verge of believable. Organ harvesting is a real thing, and unfortunately, so is people being abducted. And I mean, ambulances are real too. And if you heard multiple rumors from people you knew about sightings of this mysterious black ambulance, you may think twice before writing it off entirely. The black ambulance is creepy, but fortunately, you are not its victim, at least that time. Not too long after your drinking days in Prague, you go on a trip to Mexico with your friend. The same friend, actually. You just finished a big night on the town in Mexico City, and once again, you're tipsy, and you and your friend are walking home. You saved money on the vacation by getting a cheap hotel a little bit outside of town, and for some reason this night, you were just unable to find a taxi. So you and your friend were in for a long walk. On this walk, you get further and further outside of town when the city lights begin to fade and the darkness begins to swallow up the horizon in front of you. It's at this time when you're walking down the road where you notice a red car. You had no plans of hitchhiking and you didn't signal to this vehicle, but as they drive past you, they stop. You don't necessarily even plan on walking up to the vehicle, but they're parked directly in your path. And as you walk by the car, you notice that this red car is full of beautiful women. And the car conveniently has 2 seats available for you and your friend. They tell you not only that they can give you a ride, but that they can make all of your dreams come true. Because you're tipsy and half tired, you need to take a double take to make sure this is even real. Your friend is already in the car before you even had the chance to ponder the opportunity, and with some hesitation, you get in the vehicle as well. These women ask where you're going and begin to give you a ride in the direction you were going. Only a few minutes into this drive though, the women become quiet and take a turn onto a road that you didn't instruct them to. It's at this point when they begin speaking in a language you've never heard before and you get an odd feeling. This will be the last thing you remember. I think it's obvious that this was no regular encounter. This was the experience of a victim of the red car, an urban legend from Mexico. This urban legend involves a red car that travels between Mexico City and Cuernavaca, specifically looking for men. The car is full of women, but not ordinary women. These women are witches, and they're looking to pick up men for demonic rituals. They will pick up men that they find and offer them anything they want. They'll say basically anything to get these men in the car. But their intentions are, as you may have guessed, devious. Every man that enters this mysterious red vehicle is found lifeless on the side of the road later that same night. These bodies are typically found beaten to death with bruises, cuts, and arcane symbols carved into them. Obviously signs of a ritualistic sacrifice from these witches. Like the black ambulance, the exact origin of this urban legend is unknown, but its purpose is likely to serve as a cautionary tale against taking random back roads alone at night, or even getting in mysterious cars with mysterious women, which is an interesting twist. I thought I'd put the 2 vehicle-based urban legends together because I thought they were fitting and the stories blended well together. So yeah, whether you're in the Czech Republic in the 1980s or Mexico in the modern day, don't get in black ambulances or mysterious red vehicles, especially if women are claiming to make your dreams come true, because that always comes with a price. And in this case, that price is your life. But these obscure urban legends are only the tip of the iceberg. Let's switch things up a bit. The year is 1958, and it's just the beginning of the gold rush in Arizona. The gold rush is popularly known for the opportunities of riches and prospecting and Minecraft in real life. But most people don't understand the harsh reality of the gold rush. Not only was finding gold itself particularly hard, which led a lot of miners to actually find silver and copper instead, but these times where people would move into remote locations, specifically in harsh climates like in the middle of the desert, typically came with the spread of disease, malnutrition due to lack of supplies, poor availability to water and any sort of healthcare, and extremely dangerous working conditions to say the least. Trying to get rich off the gold rush was definitely not for the faint of heart. You and your family are moving out west because even where you were at before, you were starving and not making ends meet. So moving to the middle of the desert to at least have an opportunity to make money at least sounded like a little bit of hope. You move your wife and 2 children into a place known as Luna's Canyon, which is ironic because that's the same name as your wife, Luna. Your wife, Luna, was a homemaker, taking care of her 2 children, homeschooling them, cooking for them, preparing what she could around the house, and ultimately being the best mother she could be. And your job was to get the gold. You would go on 2-week trips at a time, taking your mule into the mines and hoping for the best. During these 2 weeks, you would sometimes find plenty of material and come back home for a week or so and have the best week you've ever had, with an abundance of food and warmth and a sense of hope and pride. And at the end of other 2-week trips, you would be almost coming home empty-handed, letting your wife know that you're gonna have to eat sparse for the next month. Regardless, you and your family always figured it out. That was until one time. It was a day like any other. You're packing up your mule, saying goodbye to your kids and your wife, going on another 2-week expedition. And you had particularly high hopes for this expedition. Although, as you get to the mine, you begin searching and looking, and you find the biggest gold nugget you've ever seen before. You consider even going home early, as this is more than a year's worth of income just in one nugget. This is amazing. But before you could even fully process what you have just found, you heard a cracking noise. And before you could even process what that noise could have meant, the mine collapsed on top of you, killing you instantly. This may be where your story ends, but it's not the end of the urban legend. Back home, your wife has no idea what's going on and is going about her life business as usual. Although after the 2 weeks pass and you're not home, she begins to get a bit anxious. But she waits. 3 weeks after you've gone, all food is essentially gone. You haven't eaten in days, and now any food that you could have fed your kids is gone too. Your wife is beginning to lose hope, and her sanity is starting to slip as well too. Her kids are making it very well known that they are hungry and tired and miss their dad. And you too are extremely hungry, extremely tired, and now at a loss for what to do. That was until one fateful night. Your wife, Luna, seemed to have broken. After another night of being unable to sleep, she slipped out of her clothes and put on her wedding dress of all things. She grabbed the biggest knife she could find in the kitchen, and she used that knife on her 2 children. She slain her own children and then cut them up into small pieces and brought them to a nearby pond where she put them in the water. The blood-stained water revealed her reflection to herself, and she seemed to have snapped back into reality and realized what she had done. She screamed the most blood-curdling scream you've ever heard, and almost instantly after passed out and died from starvation. And even with the entire family now being gone, the urban legend still isn't over. Today, this canyon is known as Slaughterhouse Canyon, and it is said that the spirits of this family still haunts the area. And on particularly quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the blood-curdling screams of the mother as she realized what she had done. And on even rarer occasions, you may even hear a quiet sobbing sound. The legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon is definitely creepy and obviously scary, and to me, seems like reason enough to not visit this specific canyon in Arizona. But of course, there's weird people who hear stories like this and make it a mission to go to these locations. But who knows, maybe I'm the weird one for not wanting to go. Slaughterhouse Canyon is just 12 minutes from Kingman, Arizona, and it is a popular spot for ghost hunting. This urban legend is definitely tragic and pretty morbid to say the least. This honestly reminds me of La Llorona, which is actually a Spanish urban legend I've covered a long time ago. That urban legend was actually in my first ever mythical creature video, and I may or may not have pronounced it wrong the first time. But that urban legend basically states that she drowned her own children in the lake and then similarly realized what she had done and then drowned herself. And after her death, her ghost still haunted small bodies of water, crying and screaming at night, leading people to the water for her to drown. So definitely some similarities, but some differences there. But yeah, Slaughterhouse Canyon is creepy, and if true, is extremely tragic and unfortunate. Let's go back to Europe, because we have some unfinished business. Unfortunately, it's not anything to do with mining. However, it does involve hairy hands. This one's simple, so let me quickly set the scene. The year is 1915. and you're driving a car in Dartmoor, England. It's getting late, just past sunset, and you had just finished a day of hiking around Dartmoor National Park. You're heading home and heading up a particular stretch of road that is known for its curves. When all of a sudden you see two large, disembodied, hairy hands grab your steering wheel and violently turn them all the way to the left, making you drive off the road and flip your vehicle. In this case, fortunately, you're only banged and bruised up, and in the hospital, you're being asked what exactly happened. You think it's probably wise to say nothing, but you go against your judgment and tell the nurses that large hands took the wheel of your car and forced you off the road. But instead of having sympathy, they put you in a straitjacket and a padded room. Okay, so yeah, hairy hands is weird. It's an urban legend from England and basically goes exactly as I described. The story dates back to around the 1910s, again, with no concrete origin, but stemmed out of reports of vehicles swerving uncontrollably off the road as if something else had taken control of them and their vehicle. Hairy hands was more or less of a local rumor around Dartmoor until it gained national attention in 1921. After a series of accidents happened in the same spot, including one fatal crash of a medical officer. I couldn't find any specific reports of these hands taking control of people's vehicles, but it is claimed that this was a confession of some who had experienced accidents on this road in Dartmoor. Now, I will say, coincidentally, this road where a lot of these accidents took place were on a road that was particularly narrow and had what was known as a dangerous camber, which is essentially just the incline of the road. So with this road being relatively dangerous in nature and having accidents common there, it is likely that people may be blaming the supernatural for their accidents. And considering that this happened in the early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, I think it's also likely that people were enjoying a beverage on the road, which likely contributed to this series of events. It kind of sounds like a drunk person's explanation for what happened too. It's almost like watching an old episode of Cops when you're home from school sick, and you just see an obviously drunk guy get pulled over for crashing his car, and the police are like, "Sir, have you been drinking?" And the guy's just like, "No, these huge, hairy hands just grabbed my wheel. It was crazy." But yeah, hairy hands is an example of a simple urban legend that to me isn't really believable. But it's still interesting, and it's an urban legend, so I'm here to have some fun. Before we continue, I want to make two quick notes. One, if you've heard of these, you don't need to leave a comment that you've heard of them. It's okay. You're just bigger brained than the rest of us. And enjoy that fact and relive the stories that you already know. Also, if you love urban legend videos, please let me know in the comments below. Because I've only made one other urban legend video, and I used to make a ton of videos about mythical creatures, but haven't done so recently. I try to make videos that you guys will enjoy, because ultimately these videos are for you. So if you ever like a specific topic I talk about, make sure you leave a comment or leave a like, because I do take note. Just look at the drug series. I made a lot of those videos because you guys love them. Okay, let's keep going. We're in Japan now, and you're enjoying some fun. I guess to keep the theme of this video consistent, we're gonna enjoy some of Japan's nightlife, which if you know anything about, you'd know involves Japanese salarymen on the side of the road sleeping 45 minutes before they're due for their next shift. Regardless, you're living it up. You're at some Kirby, Pokemon, anime themed karaoke bar, and the night is coming to a close. But before you go, you decide to use the washroom because urinating in the street is something that you left in the past. You stumble into the washroom and walk over to the urinal. You do your business and you go over to the sink, looking at the mirror above the sink specifically. You didn't have any intentions of washing your hands, but you did want to check yourself out before you headed home. As you're looking in the mirror, you notice the lights flicker, and suddenly you're left in darkness. Nothing in this room is visible besides a strange sticky note that appears to be glowing in the dark. You don't speak Japanese, but you can read the sticky note. It says Lily-san, and to you, this can mean anything. And you just assume that this is something you have to say to turn the lights back on. So you look into the mirror, not even intentionally. You're just looking in that direction because the sticky note's on the mirror and that's all you can see. And you say, Lily-san, Lily-san, Lily-san. You say it 3 times, trying to get the lights turned back on so you can leave this bathroom. When all of a sudden the lights flicker again and you turn around and you are met with something disturbing. Standing in front of you is the ghostly young girl. Her spirit was trapped in this mirror, and she is seeking revenge on anybody who summons her. Her skin seems to be charred and covered in bandages, and she is emanating the light and heat of a fire, and even smells like a disgusting burning smell. She walks closer to you, and you can feel the heat of this burnt child. She grabs you by your shirt and begins to walk into the mirror, where she pulls you into the other dimension. and you were never seen again. Lily-san is an interesting Japanese urban legend, and I would kind of equate it to the Japanese version of Bloody Mary, which is interesting because it's kind of cool to see like different cultures have similar kind of ideas, which possibly adds some validity, who knows. The Lily-san urban legend was obviously popular in Japan and revolves around a haunted mirror in a school. For the opening story, I just pretended that the person who owned this bar bought this old mirror at an antique store because it was donated by a school that was going to be demolished. That's the lore, let's put it there. But realistically, I just didn't know how I'd make a story about you being an adult in Japan going into a kid's bathroom and doing this challenge. So I just figured let's just switch it up a bit. So yeah, that's the lore of how this school's mirror got into this bar. Like I stated in the stories, the witnesses who have claimed to see Lily-san, whoever these people are, describe her as having charred skin, bandages, and a body that is emitting heat and smelling of burning flesh. This legend has kind of been popularized by school children and has a bunch of different variations, with some of them including Lily-san being able to drag you into the mirror as well. This may come as a shock to you, but there is no evidence of Lily-san's existence yet. But the story did gain popularity primarily through social media and online forums, and through that spread through school grounds, essentially through kids telling tales. Lily-san is a simple and kind of silly urban legend. I thought it was interesting because it, to me, struck me as the Japanese Bloody Mary, and it was cool that we had something in common. But if that doesn't tickle your fancy, then I've got one more for you. Staying in Japan, because we already blew our entire travel budget on the first two segments, we are once again, actually, you know what? We're not drinking this time. We're doing something else. We are just leaving the Japanese soup kitchen after a long night of feeding people in need. We did something good for once. We're switching it up. You're simply going about your business, feeling good about yourself, when you notice probably the most disturbing thing you've ever seen. You see a dog-like creature walking down the street, but with a human head. This creature is harmless, but if you try to talk to it, it will insult you. Hey, little guy, you're ugly. And after this strange encounter with this odd being, you simply go home and go to bed. Because you are a contributing member of society. You don't have time to mess with human-faced dogs or any sort of disrespect. Now, actually getting to the folklore. So this creature is called the Jin Menken. Not to be confused with Jankum, which we talked about in one of our drug videos. Check it out on screen. But the Jin Menken is known as the human-faced dog. This creature is also considered a yokai, which is pretty cool if you know about yokai. Basically, it just means a Japanese folklore creature. As suggested in the story, these creatures roam around the streets at night and can be harmless, but people are advised to not engage with them as they can throw insults if you try to conversate with them. These creatures are considered bad omens and have even been blamed for misfortune and accidents since Japan's Edo period. And during the Edo period, sightings of these creatures were actually so common that there was not only media interest, but also attempts to catch these creatures. Like not just like one guy was hunting, like not like some weird, like legit, like organized attempts to catch these Jinmenken. Some people believe that these creatures are actually people that were killed in accidents or treated poorly in their lives, and they have come back to express their sadness to the world, which is pretty petty in my opinion, but I mean, do you? Interestingly though, this is one of the few urban legends in this video that actually has some recorded evidence. In 1810, a historian claims that he saw a human-faced dog exhibited at a carnival sideshow that was drawing crowds and wealth for the owner of this creature. Since then, modern sightings have still continued, but primarily took place in the 80s, specifically with this creature rummaging through trash and lurking in alleyways, probably in dark places where it's not even easy to kind of tell what you're looking at. It's also claimed that this creature can run up to 60 miles per hour, which is just interesting. Locals speculate that this animal is actually a failed lab experiment, and others compare it to the chupacabra. This is definitely a strange urban legend that I, and probably you, haven't heard of. Real life glitches you experience every day. It was a crisp January morning, and you were waking up at the ass crack of, well, 2 p.m. You see, it's January 1st, New Year's Day, and you spent the night previously getting wasted, and you have a massive hangover. Regardless, you promised yourself that you would make 2026 the best year of your life. No more messing around, no more junk food, no more glitches. All you wanted to do this year was lock in. Although, unfortunately, this year was about to be full of glitches and, well, not locking in whatsoever. Despite your head pounding and stomach feeling upside down, you decide to take a big stretch and get out of bed. But as you reach your arms above your head and bring them back down, you hit your elbow on your headboard and feel an electric shock go from the tip of your finger to the top of your shoulder. You are only seconds into consciously experiencing the new year, and you are already experiencing your first real-life glitch. You see, there are plenty parts of your body that if you bump it, it hurts. But for some reason, there are a few molecules specifically in your elbow that give you one of the most shocking pains that is both terrifying and extremely short-lived. And I know if you're watching this video, then you've definitely hit your funny bone at some point in your life. And statistically speaking, at least a few of you watching have done so today. But to anybody who's ever hit their funny bone, it's rather obvious that A, there's nothing funny about this experience, and B, the sensation you get from hitting your funny bone is unlike any other experience on your body. But yeah, we all kind of know what the funny bone experience is like, but not many of us know how this glitch even happens. And the reason why we have a funny bone is kind of unique. The funny bone is obviously not a bone at all. What's referred to as the funny bone is actually a small stretch of the ulnar nerve which is closest to the skin in the elbow area. The ulnar nerve runs basically from your neck down to your hand. Now, interestingly, for the most part, the ulnar nerve in your forearm and upper arm is kind of protected by muscle and fat. However, when this nerve passes over your elbow close to the skin, it is at its most vulnerable. And what the ulnar nerve is vulnerable to is being compressed or bumped, both of which obviously can happen when you hit your elbow on something. While it may sound severe to have an electric shock shot through your body, and the fact that you have such a severe reaction to this bump, the reality is that this glitch is extremely normal and common, and like I mentioned, happens to basically everybody. And if you've ever bumped your elbow and thought that you broke something or had permanent nerve damage, then I have good news for you, because actually that's not the case whatsoever. Hitting your funny bone is not a sign of nerve damage, and in the vast majority of cases is completely harmless, which is a W. And I wish I knew that when I was a paranoid little bro, scared that I broke my elbow, when in reality, I just hit the nerve at the wrong point. Now, while this electric shock going through your arm would be enough motivation for most people to finally get out of bed, your hangover is telling you that you could use just a few more minutes. And because you decide to start 2026 like a true grinder and hustle culture bro, you set an alarm for 1 hour and go back to bed. But it wouldn't be long after closing your eyes and slowly fading into sleep that you experience your second glitch of the day. That glitch being the hypnic jerk. Just picture this. I'm sure we've all been there. You're laying in your bed, you're closing your eyes, and you can feel yourself drifting off to sleep. And just as you're in that twilight between wakefulness and unconsciousness, you feel yourself instantly jolt, almost as if you've just fallen or completely lost your balance. This jolt, or jerk, is completely involuntary, and is once again another real-life glitch. Fortunately, similar to hitting your funny bone, the hypnic jerk is not a sign of anything wrong, and is in most cases completely harmless and completely normal. However, that doesn't make it any less scary in the moment, because the shift of state from basically sleeping to the most alert you've ever been is, well, pretty staggering. Regardless, I'm sure we all understand the feeling of the hypnic jerk, and I don't need to explain the experience. But what I do want to explain is exactly why this happens. And the answer is unfortunately not super satisfying, because there is not a definitive answer to this question yet. However, there are leading theories that are logical and likely the case. The leading theory about hypnic jerks as of now is that in this transition between being awake and being asleep, sometimes your body can kind of miscommunicate with itself and interpret signals wrong. And in the case of hypnic jerks, what's happening is as your muscles begin to relax and as your mind and body are transitioning from being awake to sleeping, somewhere in your brain, somebody is hitting the alarm button because part of your brain is interpreting this relaxation of muscles as essentially a loss of control. More specifically, a loss of balance or simply falling altogether. And as a result, for self-defense, your body tries to have you jolt to protect yourself, either to regain your balance or brace for impact on a fall that isn't happening whatsoever. And I'm not sure about you guys, but I have vividly had multiple hypnic jerk experiences where in my dream, I was doing something that led to the jerk, which I don't know how that's even connected. Like, you know how sometimes you're on Instagram Reels and you see a reel where somebody's playing baseball, but the ball just hits the camera and you literally jump? That was basically going on in my dream leading up to the hypnic jerk. However, I'm curious if your body is anticipating a hypnic jerk and for that reason subconsciously plan something in your dreams. Or do your dreams cause the jerk in some cases? I don't know, but back to our hungover bro. Since you've now involuntarily been subjected to biological shock therapy, you decide that maybe it's time to get up. However, because it's the new year and it's obviously a new you decide to break old habits. And we all know that the best way to break an old habit is by doing it just one more time. And for that reason, you grab your lotion, your tissues, and open up your laptop. And without going into too much detail about what's going on there, we can actually talk about a different type of jerking that's not a hypnic jerk. At least kind of. Have you ever been hanging out with your bros and noticed that some people jerk it with their left hand while others do it? Okay, that's a dumb example. Let's do a different example. Have you ever noticed that some people reach for their phone from their bed with their left hand while some do it from their right hand? This phenomenon is known as handedness, and it's actually quite interesting. Unsurprisingly, a majority of the world is right-handed, but hopefully all of us also know that there is a population of the world that is left-handed. And if you are a true scholar, then you probably also know that there is an even smaller percentage of people that are ambidextrous, meaning that they could interchangeably use either hand as their dominant hand. All these are interesting and not necessarily uncommon, but did you know that at least 2 of these 3 are a glitch? Let me explain. Now, for starters, the reason why I say 2 out of these 3 is because I don't want to directly call out anybody as being glitched, because realistically that's not the case. But the lore behind how you develop your dominant hand is really quite interesting. But I guess if we're being fair, statistically, 90% of people are right-handed, meaning that, of course, 10% of people on average are left-handed, potentially suggesting that being left-handed could be a glitch. But on the same token, potentially everybody who's not ambidextrous is having a glitch because, I mean, we have 2 arms, why aren't they both dominant? Or at the very least, why doesn't everybody have the same dominant arm? These are great questions, and the answer is, well, interesting. Being either left or right-handed is one of the most obvious ways of showcasing a human brain being wired differently. And before people stretch it too far, this wiring differently doesn't necessarily extend to other things. I'm specifically talking about the wiring for your dominant hand. However, there are people that believe that being left or right-handed may come with other related traits, although this isn't necessarily scientific, and there is no inherent superiority between being left or right-handed. Scientists believe that the reason why some people have a different dominant hand is because of a cocktail of different factors, specifically genetic factors, prenatal brain development, and environmental factors. And it's also believed by scientists that because you can observe a child having either a left or right dominant hand at a very young age, it is believed that your dominant hand is not a learned behavior, and that in some cases your brain even picks your dominant hand before you're ever born, as your brain is still, well, developing. But regardless of which arm you use dominantly to grab your tissues or grab anything else, the reality is that this glitch happens in your brain before you're even born, and truly doesn't mean anything. And I think in the modern day, we all understand this. However, in the past, people were extremely superstitious. And if you lived at basically any point in history prior to the last 100 or so years, you would have been judged extremely harshly because you were left-handed, because people perceived this biological glitch to be something more nefarious. And in Roman culture, for example, people were so superstitious that left-handedness was actually associated with being a bad person. And when Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe, this tradition sort of stuck around for a while and took a long time for the stigma to be, well, erased. And while left-handed people are definitely not glitches, they have more or less experienced a glitch in their mom's belly. And for that reason, they've kind of had a rough go of things. More so in the past, but even in the modern day, there are just so many things that are designed and ergonomically optimized for right-handed people. But fortunately, the business of left-handed products has boomed, and, well, here we are today. After completing your solo session of morning glory, you finally put your feet on the floor and get your booty out of bed, officially starting your new year, hoping that you're done experiencing any more glitches. As you stand up and shuffle around your room, you feel that your room is feeling stuffy. So you walk over to your window, open it up, and take a deep breath of that fresh, crisp January winter air. But instead of experiencing a blissful inhale of crisp air, you instead feel like you have just been stabbed in the lung. Obviously, any shooting or stabbing pain in your chest is an immediate, obvious sign of a medical emergency. However, in this case, it's actually not. Although this pain in your chest is extremely uncomfortable and is definitely scary the first time you experience it, it's not a medical emergency, and it's actually another real-life glitch. Interestingly, at least for me personally, when this first happened to me, even though I felt like something was wrong, I was too scared to tell my mom about it because it happened when I was a kid, and I just hoped it would go away on its own. And it did, and I kind of forgot about it. But every time this would happen every few months or so, I had that same fear, and I never bothered to Google it or tell anybody about it. I just, as a child, accepted my death, assuming I had a ruptured lung and I was just simply waiting to perish. But instead, I got over it and then started playing Minecraft again. If this sounds even remotely familiar to you, let me explain what's actually happening when you're experiencing this very intense but typically short-lived chest pain. According to doctors, at least in young people, the primary cause for this sudden and sharp chest pain is something known as precordial catch syndrome. And similar to hitting your funny bone, the precordial catch syndrome is literally caused, once again, by a pinched nerve. Interestingly, the whole glitch of this chest pain known as precordial catch syndrome has absolutely nothing to do with your lungs or heart at all. At least for me, every time I experienced this pain, I thought my lung was punctured or being ruptured in some way. However, that's not the case at all, and it's only a nerve that's passing through that cavity. This glitch or syndrome is actually typically caused, most commonly, by sitting with poor posture, or directly after changing your seating position, which makes it kind of even more shocking because if you're just sitting down, that's kind of the last time you expect to have a random shooting pain. But when it comes to precordial catch syndrome, it can happen to you at any time. And in your case, simply opening the window and looking out of it and taking a deep inhale was enough to trigger it. And now that deep inhale is extremely painful. but luckily for you, it's at least harmless and will pass in minutes. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm experiencing this lung glitch, even though it has nothing to do with your lung, the last thing I want to do is take a deep breath, and I'll typically just take shallow breaths until it passes. However, some doctors do recommend taking one very deep breath, as that is known to sometimes end the pain immediately. So I guess it's kind of up to you if you want to wait a few minutes till it passes naturally, or if you want to endure the pain and get rid of it instantly. Either way, there's absolutely no risks to your health, which I think is comforting, especially for many of us who have experienced this and just assumed that we had something wrong with us that we just wanted to, well, ignore. And I just wish I could have told 10-year-old bro that, or even last week's bro, because honestly, I didn't even know about this until right now researching for this video. But back to you. After you finally let the pain subside, you decide to close your window, leave the bedroom, and enter the kitchen because you want to have a nice breakfast. Although, as soon as both of your feet were planted in the kitchen, well, you've totally forgot what you went in there for. And if this situation sounds familiar to you, then you have also experienced this glitch. And this glitch is actually known as the doorway effect. The doorway effect is a common cognitive glitch where your brain essentially resets or reorganizes its thoughts as you move from one environment to another. It may seem like something small, but walking through a doorway creates enough of a clear boundary within your mind between environments that your brain literally creates this as a transitional shift in context. And because of that, as you go from the old environment to the new environment, your brain sometimes can clear the cache, making you feel clueless once you're in this room, even though you just had what you wanted to do on your mind. This glitch in some cases can be scary because you literally feel like you have early onset dementia, but it's just your brain trying to reduce some of the background noise so it can focus on this new environment, even though you just went from your bedroom to your kitchen. It should go without saying that this glitch is actually harmless, and believe it or not, it's not a sign of low intelligence or a poor working memory whatsoever. This effect is actually a reflection of how your brain organizes experiences into segments based on your environment. And as I mentioned earlier, if your brain is effective at removing cognitive clutter, the thought you had in the old environment, then in some situations, it can misfire, remove too much context, and well, you'll be clueless for a second or two, typically. And while this happens to most of us on a semi-regular basis, there are factors that can actually cause this to happen more often, such as general stress or multitasking. But in any context, it's not dangerous, it's not a negative sign, and it only happens because your brain accidentally got rid of too much stuff to try to focus on this new environment. After noticing a spoon on your dining room table, you realized why you walked in the kitchen in the first place. You obviously wanted to have breakfast. And because this was already a glitch-filled day of a year that was supposed to be glitch-free, you decide to have the breakfast of champions, Cheerios with beer, because your hangover was not going to treat itself. But as you walk over to the pantry and open it, you realize one fatal mistake. The Cheerios that you swore were in the pantry were nowhere to be found. And even though you literally bought them yesterday, no matter where you look, it seems like they have almost vanished. Getting irritated, you call your mom into the kitchen, asking if she saw them or moved them, and without even saying anything to you, it seems like your mom reached into the pantry and pulled the Cheerios out of thin air. And embarrassingly, you realize that the Cheerios were right in front of you the whole time. They just weren't exactly where you expected them to be. If you've ever been searching for something only to realize that it was literally right in front of you the whole time and you were just somehow ignoring it, then, well, you've also experienced this real-life glitch. Similar to the doorway effect, not being able to see something directly in your plain sight of view has nothing to do with memory failure or anything of the sort. This glitch is once again a mechanism of your brain trying to get rid of low priority or irrelevant information. And sometimes, well, it gets rid of the wrong stuff. One example of this mechanism working properly is the fact that you literally can't notice your nose. Like, your brain intentionally ignores your nose, although you can totally see it. And if you don't believe me, put your finger on the tip of your nose and look down at it. For a few moments afterwards, you will be hyper aware of your nose, at least in most cases. But as we've seen in other cases, you can literally ignore exactly what you're looking for. And once again, stress and multitasking can help amplify this, well, glitch. Another similar but less visual example of not seeing something in plain sight is, well, looking for your phone when it's literally in your hand, or looking for your car keys when they're literally in your ignition. Regardless, after your mom seemingly magically pulled cereal out of thin air, you enjoy a quick bowl of Cheerios and quickly head out of the house because your mom asked you to grab something from the store. As you close the door and begin to walk towards your car, you get in, start the car, and begin driving, only to instantly have the thought, did I lock the front door? And did I turn off the sink after cleaning my bowl? These are two examples of simple questions we likely ask ourselves every day. But believe it or not, they're actually also a mental glitch. I'm gonna keep this one brief as it works on similar mechanisms of the last two, but the reason why so many people are so unsure if they've done basic tasks like locking a door or turning something off is actually the fact that it's a low thought or low attention task. Most of us habitually turn off what we need to turn off and lock what we need to lock. And for that reason, we don't pay much attention to do it. We do it subconsciously. But here's the thing. Our memories are strongly tied to our attention, meaning that if our focus is weak on something, at least consciously, our memories will be weak too. Which is why, more often than not, if we do a task habitually, we will likely have little to no memory of it, creating doubt in our mind, potentially causing us to double check or have anxiety until we come back home to check. However, in most cases, we did do the thing, we just didn't remember. And once again, this is just our brain's attempt to have less cache in the background so we can have more mental bandwidth to focus on what matters. You know, the saber-toothed tiger in front of us, not the locked door in our past. And in some severe cases, this glitch could actually lead you to cause your child at home when you go on a family vacation. But luckily enough, this will actually be the premise of one of the best Christmas movies of all time. After retracing your steps in your mind, you come to the conclusion that you definitely did lock the door, and your anxiety reduces at least a little bit. And because you feel like you've been battling yourself for hours now, you decide to check the time, because you know the drive to the grocery store is 20 minutes, and you have to be at least halfway there. But as you look at the clock on your dashboard, you notice that you've only been driving for 2 minutes. And at this point, it feels, well, impossible. And while the only explanation at this point may seem like a time warp, in reality, you are experiencing, well, you guessed it, another glitch. This glitch being time dilation. And while this phenomenon is something most of us experience on a daily basis, I would argue most of us don't actually know how it works. There's a popular saying that goes, time flies when you're having fun. And honestly, that's kind of scientifically true. But also, the opposite is true. Time goes very slow when you're scared, and you just experienced that on your drive. Because of the anxiety of not remembering if you locked your door, your brain had to process more information per second than it would on average because you were trying to retrace your steps and try to remember exactly if you moved the knob or not. And because even though you were simply just driving down the road, due to the fact that you were so deep in thought thinking about locking the door or not, and the additional information you had to process to do so, your mind was creating denser memories, and for that reason, as you look back on that 2-minute drive you had, it feels like it was longer than it actually was. And that's because your brain indirectly measures time through attention, memory, and sensory input. Now, interestingly, on the contrast, when you are doing repetitive or enjoyable tasks that don't require a ton of thought, your mind is able to relax, and for that reason, time seems like it's simply flying by. But that's because you're not necessarily forming as many memories, and your perception of that time passed is, well, less. And this mechanism is extremely similar to why you forget if that door was even locked in the first place. And once again, this glitch is not a flaw or a sign of anything negative, it's simply a byproduct of your brain trying to be as efficient as possible. And sometimes it doesn't always get it right. And I guess the negative byproduct of this byproduct is that fun times seem to be really short and bad times seem to be really long. But in reality, they're just both your brain's perspective of them. After a long, seemingly endless drive, you arrive at the grocery store, but as soon as you walk through the doors, you notice something horrible brewing. Deep within your diaphragm, you notice a spasm happening, and before you can even process what's going on, you make that terrible sound. You have just got the hiccups out of nowhere. And once again, you have been cursed with another real-life glitch. And as I would bet money that everybody watching this video has experienced hiccups, I doubt most of us understand the true reason why we experience such a seemingly random, well, reflex. Unsurprisingly, hiccups are harmless. I think we all know that by now. But what not everybody knows is the reason why they happen. And hiccups are actually caused by the diaphragm, which is the primary muscle responsible for breathing. What's happening when you hiccup is that your diaphragm is unexpectedly spasming. And with each spasm of the diaphragm is a quick intake of air. Now, this intake of air is short-lived and is actually abruptly cut off by your vocal cords snapping shut, which is what creates that classic hiccup sound. But besides how hiccuping even works, the reason we get hiccups is because of, well, a pretty big handful of factors. Hiccups can be triggered by either eating too quickly, swallowing air, drinking a carbonated beverage, a sudden change in temperature in your environment, emotional stress, or excitement. And the single common denominator amongst most of those triggers is that the nerves involved with breathing, specifically the phrenic and vagus nerves, become irritated, overstimulated, and for that reason, essentially set off the hiccup reflex. And this reflex can go on for minutes, hours, or in some cases, even days, and even more extreme cases, weeks. If nothing else in this video, we've learned that nerves are responsible for a lot of glitches. But it's interesting how much they just glitch and begin working against us. Because while they are harmless, they're definitely annoying, and in some cases embarrassing. And because your hiccups were just so severe in this grocery store, you decide that whatever your mom needed, it could wait until later. So you decide to get back in your car, drive home, and step into the kitchen. Luckily, your hiccups went away on your drive home. However, as soon as you step into the kitchen, you are hit with an overwhelming feeling that what you are doing right now, you've done before. Everything was the same. The clothes you're wearing, the time of day, the location you're standing was all overwhelmingly familiar. And while this feeling hits you in such a strong way, it's not scary, it's just odd. and it's also a glitch commonly known as deja vu. One good example of deja vu for people that watch the channel a lot is me telling you that 75% of you watching this video right now are not subscribed, at least according to YouTube. And also, I love making videos that you guys really enjoy. So if you love this video about real life glitches and want to see another one, make sure to leave a like or leave a comment below saying part 2 so I know that you guys want another episode in this series. Now, shilling aside, deja vu is likely one of the most common mental glitches we've all experienced, probably on a semi-regular basis. For me, deja vu is pretty rare, but probably happens at least maybe once a year. Although almost every time I experience it, it's equally unsettling, but also rather short-lived. It's almost like a wave that hits you and then just splashes away and fades back into the ocean. Although for me, the lingering feeling after deja vu is definitely eerie. And what else is eerie about this glitch is the fact that there's no definitive reasoning for deja vu, at least as of yet. The leading explanation for deja vu right now is that deja vu happens when the brain processes the same information in 2 slightly different ways. And if that sounds confusing, well, just imagine information floating through your brain. But instead of information going through 2 different pathways at the same speed, information in pathway 1 is just slightly faster than information in pathway 2. As information from pathway 1 reaches the final destination faster than 2, by the time that the second information gets there as well, it perceives that second part of information not as complementary to the first, but as a recollection, if that makes sense. It's an interesting theory, but it's also not the only one. Another more simple theory for why deja vu happens is that our brain is literally just glitching out and swapping out the emotions for familiarity with recollection. And based off what we've learned about the brain so far in this video, that seems plausible. But because you've just had an awful day so far, you've been hungover all day, you've been experiencing endless glitches, and your head is pounding, you decide that your best bet now is to go to bed, catch a nap, rest, recover, hopefully sleep everything off, and end this endless streak of glitches, hopefully for this entire year. As you get as snug as a bug in a rug and begin to once again drift off into dreamland, you fortunately avoid the hypnotic jerk and successfully fall into sleep. Although it wouldn't be long until you experience the final glitch of the day. As you lay in your bed, you feel a looming presence looking over you, and you so happen to half asleep, half awake open your eyes, only to notice the most terrifying shadow figure in the corner of your room. Being absolutely petrified, the only thing you want to do is hide and scream and run, but unfortunately, you can do nothing of the above. Your mouth won't open, your arms won't move, and this creature is only moving closer and closer to you. Your body is absolutely paralyzed, and your mind is only half on your side. And this glitch is likely the most terrifying we've discussed in this entire list. That glitch being sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is only typically something that people experience for seconds to minutes tops, but that doesn't make it any less terrifying in the moment. The reason why sleep paralysis happens is because during REM sleep, your brain automatically shuts off your muscles so you don't act out on your dream, which is the reason why we're not all sleepwalkers all the time. But that's another glitch we can talk about in a part 2, sleepwalking. However, sometimes when your brain turns off your muscles, it can also forget to turn itself off, which leads to sleep paralysis, the state where your brain is either half or still fully awake, but your muscles are, well, paralyzed, leaving you in a very awkward and scary situation. Although, fortunately, it's not dangerous, or a sign of any mental illness or demonic possession. Sleep paralysis is more likely to occur if you've experienced sleep deprivation, irregular sleep schedules, high stress, or, interestingly, sleeping on your back. But in every case of sleep paralysis, your body will figure itself out, albeit with a bit of discomfort to your psyche, especially if you're experiencing, well, shadowy hallucinations. Luckily for you, as this shadow demon crawled onto your bed, it noticed your extremely crispy and crunchy bed sheets and decided that you were the real demon here, and it disappeared. And as that fog lifted and your fear was gone, you were able to truly go to bed and end this very glitchful day, hoping that the next day would be better. The luckiest people who survived the impossible. Frane Salak. Frane was born in June of 1929 in Yugoslavia. He was born unexpectedly 2 months early while his parents were on a boat in the Adriatic Sea. Fortunately, both him and his mother survived, and it's reported that his father even cut the umbilical cord with a fishing knife. When Frane was only 11 months old, he had life-threatening intestinal issues that nearly took his life. And at 11 years old, Frane nearly lost his eyesight completely, but reportedly recovered due to his mother's prayers to Saint Teresa and a nun's herbal medicine. Already, the childhood of Frane sounds like somebody who survived deadly and dangerous situations multiple times. But believe it or not, the childhood of Frane Salek is actually some of the most peaceful times in his entire life. And the situations that made him now famous actually all took place after the age of 33 years old. From the age of 11 to 33, Frane lived a relatively normal life. He went to music school, became a music teacher, got married, got divorced, had a child, and got remarried, essentially living the standard Eastern European way of life. However, it was that way of life that was challenged on a train ride from Bosnia to Yugoslavia in January of 1962. According to Frane himself, he was riding this train home from work, and he was on this train with the elderly mother of the mayor of Stone. Stone being a neighboring city to the one he was born in Croatia. According to Frane, the elderly mayor's mother was his responsibility to protect, and that he did. During the train ride on this cold, rainy day, the train is traveling along a canyon. And while the landscape of this canyon was beautiful, the conditions of this canyon were about to put him in a situation far from it. It's believed that only hours prior to this train voyage, a small mudslide near the top of the canyon caused a rockfall to land directly on the train track. And while this went unnoticed by the train conductor, when the train hit the rocks on the track, it successfully derailed the train, plunging the train into freezing cold waters. According to Frane, after the train hit the water, he told the old woman to hold on to him and hold her nose as he broke the train window with his elbow and successfully swam him and the old woman to shore, although Frane did sustain a broken arm and hypothermia. And while Frane and this elderly woman did survive, the 17 other passengers on the train unfortunately passed away in the accident. That situation alone is the story of a lifetime. Although for Frane, this is only the beginning of his multi-chapter story with his close encounters with death. Only a year later, after the alleged heroic train situation, in 1963, Frane would find himself in another life-threatening situation. During this time, Frane is teaching music in Slovenia as part of his service in a military band for the Yugoslavians People Party. Although, during his time abroad, he receives a desperate call from his mother, and she informs Frane that she has been hospitalized and desperately needs him to come visit her, as this might be his last opportunity to say goodbye. Obviously, understanding the severity of his situation, Frane books the next flight from Slovenia back to Croatia. And only hours after receiving this desperate call, he is in the air. The aircraft he's on is known as a DC-10, and while it's a relatively large plane, this flight only has 17 passengers and 4 crew aboard. And at some point during this short flight, Frane begins to strike up a conversation with the flight attendant near an emergency exit to try to calm his nerves. This was his first flight ever, and it coincidentally ended up being his last as well. Frane has told reporters that during his conversation with the flight attendant, he heard a massive bang on the plane, and then almost immediately after, the exit door was ripped off of the plane behind him, causing the change in pressure to suck him out of the airplane. It is then alleged that he fell 800 meters before harshly landing in a haystack in a small farm village in Croatia. According to Frane, he spent 4 days in a coma and then woke up in the hospital, where he learned that he had no serious injuries besides the loss of consciousness and, well, coma. During interviews decades after the incident took place, Frane also reported that the loud bang heard on the plane was likely the tail of the plane striking a mountain, causing a fire in the plane and causing everybody on the plane besides him and the stewardess he was talking to pass away. Although that's something we'll discuss more later. But in case a train crash or a plane crash weren't enough, don't worry, because there's more. In 1966, Frane was riding a bus from Yugoslavia to Croatia when the bus skidded off the road into the river, once again drowning passengers and leaving Frane injured, although alive. And following these now train, plane, and bus accidents, Frane also allegedly was involved in 3 separate car accidents where he defied death every single time. The first car accident alleged by Frane involves his car catching fire as he was driving it, nearly killing him in the process. And then a year later, he had another incident with his car catching fire, although this time the fire wasn't in the engine bay, the fire was being blown directly at him through the air vents, singeing his hair, although he was able to get out of the car in time before it exploded. And then years after that, Frane alleges that he was driving on a canyon road when a United Nations military truck improperly took a curve on this steep mountain road, causing Frane to swerve into a guardrail, causing his car to fly off of a cliff. However, because Frane was not wearing a seatbelt, he was able to jump out of his car and land in a tree before his car made a 300-foot plummet to the bottom of the canyon and exploded. Now, after surviving all of these death-defying situations, it would be reasonable to say that this guy has likely won the lottery multiple times over. Although in 2002, that metaphor would also become reality, because during that year, Frane bought a lottery ticket and ended up winning over $1 million equivalent. It was after this notable lottery winning when the story of Frayne Selleck kind of became publicly known, because after this lottery winning, he began doing public interviews, and the stories that he was telling was simply too much to deny. And he began to do more and more interviews, and these stories began to go viral. So viral, in fact, that in 2004, Frayne even starred in a Doritos commercial. And it's even alleged that during the drive home from this Doritos commercial, he hit a deer in his car, which is unfortunate and also dangerous. Now, if you've been paying extra attention, you would have noticed that I've been putting extra emphasis on the fact that all of these stories are either alleged or reported by Frayne and not, well, proven. Almost all of the death-defying stories we know about Frayne became widely known decades after they happened. And out of all of these now famous stories, none of them have been independently verified, and there has also been contradictions found within different tellings of these stories by Frayne, meaning that there may be a bit of fiction mixed in with the facts. Although I did want to tell this story because of how insane it is, and how, well, popular it's kind of became. Regardless if you believe Frayne or not, or you believe he was punching up his stories or making up complete fairy tales, the reality is Frayne is famously known as one of the most lucky, unlucky men to ever live. And whether or not his stories actually happened, or even kind of happened, we may never know. Frayne passed away at the age of 87 in 2016. And today, we are still telling the stories that he told. Fact or fiction, Frayne, the humble music teacher from Croatia, turned himself from man to legend. Ron Hunt. It is August 2003, and Ron Hunt is a 41-year-old construction worker working in California. He is your average run-of-the-mill blue-collar man. He likes truck, beer, boob, and he certainly doesn't mind getting an eyeful of either of those things. However, on this fateful day, Ron was about to get an eyeful of something he did not bargain for. This day on the job site started like any other, briefing with the other contractors and then getting right to work. Shortly after starting his shift, Ron was tasked drilling a hole in cement roughly 5 to 10 feet off of the ground. This task was nothing new to Ron, and he grabbed the appropriate tools. He grabbed an impact drill with an 18-inch chip auger drill bit and a 6-foot ladder. Approaching the wall on the job site that required the hole, Ron carefully set up the ladder, ensured that it was sturdy, and then began to climb the ladder and then, of course, drill. However, almost instantly after beginning to drill this hole, Ron could tell that something was not right. The 18-inch drill bit was struggling to make any progress into the concrete, and while Ron was trying to use leverage to force it into the guide hole, he noticed that the ladder was not as sturdy as he once thought. Although, almost immediately after noticing that the ladder was not extremely stable, his footing gave way from right below him, and he lost his balance and fell forward. This situation is terrifying. However, for Ron, this is something that he was trained for. And as a construction worker with decades of experience, he knew that when you're working at heights, if you are falling, you should throw your tool as far away as you can. And that he did. Although, unfortunately, Ron did not throw the drill far enough. And instead of having the drill land feet away from him, the drill landed drill side up on the ground directly below Ron. And Ron fell directly onto the drill, having the drill bit penetrate through his right eye through the back of his skull. An injury that undoubtedly would kill 99.9% of people that it would happen to. Although for Ron, this extremely unlucky situation would actually turn out to be the luckiest situation of his life. Immediately following the fall, Ron's coworkers ran to his side. And while the scene was absolutely gruesome, they remained calm and called for help immediately. While waiting for help, Ron was not only shockingly alive, but conscious, and was able to feel around his head to try to understand how severe the injury was. And when he felt the entry point of the drill on his eye and the exit point on the back of his head, he knew he was in serious trouble. Although he didn't let that situation get the better of him. Due to Ron's coworkers' quick response, the paramedics arrived only minutes after the accident happened. And after examining Ron, a helicopter arrived to airlift him to a medical center in Reno, Nevada. Interestingly, it has been reported, not by Ron, but by actual doctors and nurses, that during his time in the hospital while he was being examined by professionals, Ron was not only conscious and talking, but also lighthearted and cracking jokes. Meaning that even in his most dire times, he was able to keep a light heart, which to me is just so cool and honestly respectable. However, even though Ron was able to laugh and joke, the situation was still extremely life-threatening and difficult, considering that in most instances, this injury would be instant death. Therefore, this has not been an injury that has been often treated, meaning that the medical professionals not only had to think fast, but leave no room for error. Because while Ron was alive now, there was so many opportunities for them to accidentally kill him while trying to remove the drill bit. While the doctors and nurses were examining Ron, they were able to discover why this injury didn't kill him. And that's because the path that this drill bit took through Ron's skull was almost the perfect trajectory to not puncture the brain whatsoever. Looking at an x-ray, they were able to see that the drill bit literally pushed the brain out of the way rather than penetrating through it, which is why Ron not only survived, but also had no neurological issues. He wasn't paralyzed, he wasn't lacking motor skills or speech function, he was all there, just with a giant metal spike in his head. Interestingly, one of the first treatments that Ron received was a tetanus shot and an IV full of antibiotics. And this is because there was a massive non-sterile foreign object that not only caused, but also resided within multiple lacerations to the head, holes in the skull, and was also currently in contact with the brain raw. And because of this, there was an overwhelming opportunity for infection to take place either in the skull, the brain, or either of the skin lacerations. Meaning that even if they were able to successfully remove this drill, there was still a significant chance of infection taking Ron's life. After receiving this first dose of antibiotics, he was sent to the operating room, where the removal procedure began. And while it may seem like one of the most counterintuitive and dangerous methods, the way that the doctors decided to remove the drill bit was by using the same way that it got in. That's right, in the operating room, they put Ron on a ladder and made him fall on the ground so that the floor would push the drill bit out. That's a lie, I'm totally joking. What they actually did in the operating room was slowly and carefully screw the drill bit in reverse so that it would easily make its way out. And the reason they were able to do this was because there was no brain tissue entrapped in the drill. Because it wasn't penetrated, it was simply pushed to the side. And once the drill was fully removed from the skull, the doctors were then able to begin a massive cleanup job, making sure that this huge wound was not and did not get infected. They removed dirt, debris, bone fragments, and dead tissue, which unfortunately included his right eye. Although after the surgery and the following surgery to fix some of the fractures in his skull, Ron spent a few weeks in hospital being monitored to ensure that no infections would grow, and once doctors were satisfied that his condition was stable, he was released to go home and went on to live a normal life, and actually became known as the Miracle Man because of how lucky and unlucky this man was. After everything was said and done, the only lasting impacts that Ron had due to this event were the fact that he was blind in the right eye because he didn't have a right eye, and nerve damage to one of the nerves on the right side of his face, meaning that the right side of his face was essentially paralyzed. But beyond those two effects specifically, Ron made a full recovery, and still to this day lives a normal life. And while it definitely feels a bit odd to call somebody lucky for losing an eye and having facial nerve damage, when you understand the context of the situation, it's easy to see how lucky and unlucky Ron truly was. Unlucky, obviously, because of the accident that took place, but lucky because he literally survived the impossible, and potentially the world's most severe lobotomy we've ever seen.
Roger Woodward.
It was a warm July day in 1960, and a New York father decided it was the perfect day to take his two children on a boat ride. The location that this father decided to take his children on the boat ride was an area of water in New York known as the Upper Niagara River, the river that leads directly to Niagara Falls, the iconic waterfall on the border of the United States and Canada. This was a boat ride that this man had done numerous times before, although on this boat ride, things would not go so smoothly. As reported by Roger Woodward himself, decades after the event took place, his recollection of events are as follows. Roger, the son, his sister, and his father were all enjoying the relatively standard boat ride when Roger asked his father if he could steer the boat for a little while. His father agreed and allowed him to sit on his lap on the seat, although almost instantly after joining his father at the wheel, the waters began to get dangerously rough and the boat began to develop motor trouble, leaving the boat essentially stranded in dangerous water. Realizing that the situation was dire, Roger's father removed Roger from his lap and tried to take control of the boat, although his efforts were unsuccessful, and the boat actually ended up capsizing in the river due to the severity of the waters they were in. When the boat capsized, all three of the family members were tossed into the water, and each one of them had a different experience. Roger's sister, who was 17 at the time, was shockingly saved and pulled out of the water only 6 meters of the edge of the falls. Although for her brother, Roger, and her dad, they were not so lucky to be saved. and both Roger Woodward and his father went over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. Now, if you know anything about Niagara Falls, there has been numerous people who have gone over the falls, many of which who have not survived. It's actually been estimated that since 1850, there have been at least 5,000 people who have gone over the falls. And it's also estimated that there are 20 to 30 deaths that occur annually at Niagara Falls, although mostly due to personal intention, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, out of those thousands of people that have gone over the falls, it is reported that only 16 to 20 have been confirmed to survive the extremely deadly and dangerous Niagara Falls. Now, I mentioned this to give context about exactly how deadly and rare it is to even survive. Just doing some quick math based on the estimates, that's literally a 0.05% chance of surviving. Back to the story, however. Unfortunately, both Roger and his father were swept up in the rapids and sent down Niagara Falls. Roger's father, unfortunately and unsurprisingly, perished in the falls. But somehow, miraculously, Roger Woodward survived being sent down Niagara Falls at the age of only 7 years old. After being sent down the waterfall, surviving the immense pressure of the water, nearly missing all of the jagged and deadly rocks at the bottom of the falls, and not drowning, Roger was actually spotted by tourists on the Maid of the Mist boat. It's a little boat that goes to the bottom of Niagara Falls, and the crew quickly made a beeline over to the boy as they saw his bright orange life jacket, likely the item that saved this boy's life. After the captain put the boat directly beside Roger, his crew threw a life preserver and they were able to successfully bring him on board merely minutes after spotting him. Roger was immediately sent to the Niagara General Hospital, where he stayed for only 3 days with a minor concussion and bruises. There has been numerous daredevils who have tried to make safe and insulated barrels to go over the falls in, and over half of them have died. Although this 7-year-old boy who was simply trying to have a good time with his family went over the falls, survived, and lived to tell the tale. And he has since this event visited Niagara Falls often into his adulthood. Roger was undoubtedly extremely lucky in this extremely unlucky situation, and he has gone on record saying that he is extremely grateful to be alive. Speaking of lucky situations, I would say it's pretty lucky that you found this channel. Realistically, there are millions of YouTube channels, and you could be watching anything right now. So the fact that you found my channel, to me, is super lucky, and I hope that you're enjoying this video. Now, I've never really made a video on this topic before, so I just wanted to say if you guys would love to see a part 2 about people that survived the impossible, the luckiest, unlucky people, leave a like or leave a comment below saying part 2 so that I know you guys want more of this topic. If you're new here and haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, because we make cool videos every single Friday. But with that being said, let's get to the final entry of this list. Bill Morgan. The year is 1998, and Bill Morgan is a 37-year-old truck driver living in a camper van. Not a lot is known publicly about the early life of Bill Morgan, but knowing that he was born and raised in Australia, we can assume that he grew up playing with spiders and fighting kangaroos. Regardless, from his birth to the age of 37, it's believed that Bill lived the life of the average Australian man, doing honest work and traveling the country he loved in his camper van. A simple and respectable life. Although, everything was about to change on one fateful day. During what appeared to be a relatively normal drive in his camper van, Bill was struck and nearly killed in a car crash that seemingly happened in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, Bill was able to survive this car accident, although not by much. And while he was recovering in the hospital, it was discovered that due to this car accident, he actually developed a heart condition. Now, while most of us would consider a heart condition a better trade-off than death in this situation, this heart condition was still not ideal. And what doctors recommended to Bill was that he take a certain medication to help relieve his symptoms and protect his heart. Although, when Bill started taking this medication, he suffered a severe allergic reaction that once again nearly killed him by ironically triggering a heart attack. After experiencing this cardiac event due to this medication, Bill was declared clinically dead for 14.5 minutes. Although he was miraculously revived by paramedics and was then sent to the hospital where he spent 12 days in a coma. And during this time, things were not looking good, and doctors were actually advocating to Bill's family that they should potentially consider end-of-life planning and, well, pulling the plug. And while that sounds absolutely unfair and devastating and cruel, the reality is it wasn't necessarily bad advice from a professional perspective. And that's because previously, as we know, Bill was clinically dead for 14.5 minutes, which statistically speaking means that even if he were to recover from the coma, he would be in a severe, likely vegetative state due to the cognitive decline his brain would have experienced without having oxygen for such an amount of time. For context, brain damage begins to occur at only 4 minutes without oxygen. So the fact that he was dead for over 14 minutes paints a pretty severe picture. However, because Bill had already been so lucky up until this point, and his family was so determined and dedicated, they decided to do no such thing. Unfortunately, after 12 days of being in a coma, he not only woke up, but woke up and made a full recovery, having all of his mental faculties and being able to walk and talk. Something that has to be a statistic anomaly. But we're not done yet. So far, Bill has beaten death in the form of a car accident, in the form of an allergic reaction, in the form of being literally clinically dead, and in the form of a coma. Although, even though every one of those instances is an expression of bad luck, it's also an expression of good luck because he, well, survived them seemingly unscathed. Although, unbelievably, he didn't use up all of his luck on all of these near-death experiences. And that's because in the year following the car crash and coma, Bill not only bought a lottery scratcher ticket, something he did weekly, but he also won. And he didn't win $5 or $10, he won a Toyota Corolla that was worth anywhere from 17 to 30,000 Australian dollars. And this is where the story gets really quite interesting, because similar to Frayn's story at the beginning of this video, after this lottery winning, Bill's story became publicly televised, and it was spreading rapidly and so interesting because of how much misfortune he experienced, only to then go on and not only survive, but win the lottery. And because his story was so interesting, the news wanted to do a segment about Bill. While filming the segment, the news anchor asked Bill if he minded buying a lottery ticket so they could reenact the scene where he won the car. And since scratching lottery tickets was a pastime of Bill's, he had no issue doing such. Although, to the surprise of everybody, when Bill went ahead and bought and scratched off the lottery ticket simply to just get some B-roll for the news, he was shocked at what he had found. While the cameras were rolling and Bill was simply silently scratching off a ticket, Bill suddenly froze and the energy in the room paused. Bill turned around, looked directly at the camera, and quietly said, "I just won $250,000. I'm not joking. I just won $250,000. And then immediately after realizing what he had just said and won, he put his hands over his head and said, "Please don't film me. I don't believe this is happening. I think I will have another heart attack." Bill was obviously shocked about what had just happened, likely more shocked than us. And once the reality set in a bit more and he knew he wasn't having a heart attack, he quickly called his fiancée, told her that they could buy a new house, and she even later went on to tell the news, quote, "I hope he hadn't used up all of his good luck." And one of my favorite parts about the story is that this is verifiable, and the footage of this happening is literally on YouTube right now. I'm going to play a short clip of it, but it is just so wholesome to see this man's genuine reaction to finally catching a break after nearly losing his life multiple times, realistically due to no fault of his own. I don't know about you, but I find that video so wholesome, and I just love when genuine, real people get what they deserve. In a good way. In my opinion, Bill is a legend. And while all of this happened back in 1998 and 1999, as of 2020, Bill still lives in Melbourne with his wife. And while he does still suffer with heart issues and arthritis because of the car accident, he is grateful for his life, even stating, quote, "I've had a bonus of 22 years. Oh wait, I guess I should maybe say this Australian. I've had okay, that's not Australian. I've had okay, let me try it one more time. Like, I'm trying my hardest. Yeah, I've had a bonus of 22 years. Okay, like, I'm gonna try it, but okay, let's just try it. I've had a bonus of 22 years, and that's the, wait, again. I've had a bonus of 22 years, and that's the best way to live your life. Every day I get up and put on my shoes, and even if I'm not real well, I still shuffle down the road and smell the roses. Look at the sun and think about how lucky I am." That was potentially the worst accent you've ever heard, but it's also a true expression of gratitude, which for me makes Bill that much more of a legend. And it's even reported that to this very day, Bill is still buying lottery tickets every single week. And who knows? Maybe soon there'll be an update to this video where Bill won the lottery once again. But even if he never does, I would say he is very much so a lucky man who beat some pretty unlucky situations. The craziest lawsuits that won big money. Have you ever been walking through the grocery store when you notice a large puddle on the floor? Although there's no wet floor sign, to most, this seems like something you should avoid. But if you are feeling extra opportunistic, this could be a big payday. And all it would require is you to hurt yourself really bad or to put on a really good performance. Now, nobody gets paid for hurting themselves, but you can get paid if you're in a place and it's reasonably expected that this place will be safe for you to use. Then if it's not, you may have the opportunity to file a lawsuit. And while this system exists to protect entities and individuals, it's not always used in such a benevolent way. Which is why today we're not only discussing the craziest lawsuits, but crazy lawsuits that won big money. Let's begin. Richard Overton versus Anheuser-Busch. In 1991, a man named Richard Overton was a simple, blue-collar, working-class man. And what does every simple, blue-collar, working-class man love? A good beer at the end of the day. And maybe even during the day. And for a lot of people, Bud Light is the beer of choice. Now, Bud Light is obviously a consumer product. And like all consumer products, they come with interesting and fun commercials. Most commercials and advertisements try to portray a certain lifestyle or a certain emotional response when it comes to a product to try to give a product emotional weight in somebody's head, helping promote a purchasing decision. For example, if you're trying to sell a fancy watch, you might put it on a fancy looking person in a fancy looking house driving a fancy looking car. A great example of this is watch any perfume or cologne commercial. Like, there's literally a Christian Dior perfume commercial that is just Johnny Depp playing the guitar with wolves in the desert. You're gonna see it on screen, but that's just what I remember from the top of my head. Regardless, ads and marketing are supposed to be fun and creative and make you feel cool and look cool, right? Well, not always. And in this case, Richard Overton felt like Anheuser-Busch, the maker of Bud Light, specifically betrayed him. In 1991, Bud Light was running advertising campaigns that specifically portrayed glamorous lifestyles, beaches, attractive women, all in association with Bud Light. And these ads, to some, imply that drinking Bud Light would result in a similar experience, which I guess you could say is more or less not unreasonable, but I think most would just assume that, yeah, okay, they want to make this beer look cool, I get it, but not to Richard Overton. Richard Overton thought that drinking this beer would make you cool. It would give you the glamorous lifestyle. It would put you on a beach somehow, and beautiful women would simply flock to you because you were drinking it. But because that didn't happen, he wasn't only disappointed, he was furious. So furious, in fact, that he decided to hire a lawyer and sue Anheuser-Busch. Now here's the deal. Believe it or not, Richard Overton was actually able to find a lawyer who was willing to take the situation, which just goes to show that there were hungry lawyers out there, you know, Better Call Saul type of guys. And the legal claim that Richard and his lawyer ended up making was that the ads were falsely advertising a lifestyle, and due to this, Richard Overton suffered emotional distress and mental injury because the promised lifestyle he saw was never materialized. At this point, this sounds like a fake joke, but I promise you it's not. And even if the story ended there, it would already be crazy enough. But it doesn't, because obviously he won money. And while it's not the biggest money in the world, it's sizable enough to add it to this list. Once this lawsuit was filed, the ridiculousness of it alone was enough to spark media attention, causing a lot of negative publicity about marketing and specifically Bud Light. Which is why, although Bud Light would have had a very easy case to win here, they decided to settle with Richard Overton for $10,000 cash. Not because they thought that he was right, but because they wanted the attention to die down, and they figured if they gave him 10 grand, he would shut up and go about his life. And well, that's exactly what happened. And like I said, $10,000 definitely isn't nothing, but compared to some of the money that people get in the other cases in this video, it looks like chump change. And I'm really curious if he truly felt this way or if he just wanted to see if he could get some money. Okay, editor's note here. I actually was just going through and finalizing this and realized when I was doing some additional research that this actually didn't get paid out. Literally, this $10,000 was not paid out. The case was actually dismissed. And keep in mind, this case happened in 1991. Even as far as 2007, he was still doing interviews trying to get this money out of Anheuser-Busch. The same $10,000 almost 20 years later. So yeah, my bad. I wanted to definitely make sure I added this in. He actually didn't win a little bit of money. He wanted no money, but you know what? It's already in the video now. It's a funny story, but okay, the rest of them, they're actually winning big money. And the money in each section is only going to get bigger and bigger. Cleante Peters versus Universal Studios. In the last case, we discussed advertising being too misleading because it was not true to the expectation. But in this case, we're almost experiencing the exact opposite. Because in this case, Cleante Peters, a 57-year-old woman at the time, took her 10-year-old granddaughter to the haunted Halloween house in Universal Studios looking to get a fright, but ended up getting much more than they bargained for. I'm man enough to say that I don't have a huge tolerance for scary stuff. I've never really done haunted houses, I've never really wanted to, and I'm generally scared of most things. So already I feel a bit sympathetic towards this case. But I will say, being somebody who is sensitive to scary things, I know to stay away from haunted houses. But maybe that's just me, because obviously Cleante Peters did not share the same mindset. So here's the situation. The story, according to Cleante Peters, goes as follows. Cleante and her granddaughter both enter the Halloween Horror Nights haunted house, and things start off relatively normal. But then it went downhill fast. And Cleante Peters, specifically what her problem was that there was a costumed man dressed with a fake chainsaw that was allegedly chasing her around, making threatening motions, and doing so in such a degree that it not only caused severe emotional trauma, but even caused her physical injury as she was attempting to escape this chainsaw-wielding maniac. It's not stated what happened after this initial experience, but my assumption is that she collected her granddaughter, left the park, and then went ahead to find her better Better Call Saul lawyer. And when she had this lawyer, her official argument was that she claimed that the attraction went too far and failed to ensure safety, especially regarding people with medical conditions or anxiety disorders. Now here's the deal. This is actually somewhat reasonable. And I'm not gonna just dunk on this person for the sake of entertainment. I think that there's a very real chance that there could have been, a person working in a haunted house that was taking it too far, maybe getting handsy or aggressive. That's totally possible. But my assumption is that's not the case, and this is more or less of a situation of somebody maybe being somewhere they shouldn't have been. Clancy actually ended up taking this to court, and she was awarded, drumroll please, $15,000. And the court and jury decided that even though Clancy was at a horror-themed attraction, there definitely needs to be a line in safety standards that are enforced. And with Clancy winning this case, it actually resulted in the park reevaluating their safety standards and even their waiver systems. And whether or not they made positive or negative changes, that I can't report. Although they did pay Clancy $15,000 for being a little too spooky. Kathleen Robertson versus a Texas furniture store. Kathleen Robertson was a young mother of one and lived in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. Her husband worked throughout the day and she was a stay-at-home mother. So during the day, her and her 3-year-old son at the time would go out and run errands from time to time. On the fateful day of the incident we're talking about, Kathleen brought her 3-year-old son to a furniture store to look for a brand new couch for their home. But this unassuming trip to the furniture store was actually going to turn catastrophic very soon. The story states that during her time furniture shopping, Kathleen was looking at different couches and price tags when she was walking from couch to couch until she tripped over an object and ended up twisting her ankle and falling. Because Kathleen sustained such a serious injury while furniture shopping, she sued. But the twist is this: that object that she tripped on was actually her own 3-year-old son, who was running around the store like a bull in a china shop. Kathleen argued that the store was negligent and argued that the staff should have had better control over the store's environment. If your blood is already boiling, it gets better. In court, the jury actually awarded Kathleen $80,000. Not only did this spark outrage in some, but it also caused the furniture store to go under, closing a small family business. But that's not the worst of the situation. The worst part about this entire situation is actually that it's not real. That's right. That's why I refer to this as the story. This popular urban legend of Kathleen Robertson, who tripped and fell over her own son suing the store for 80 grand, is not real. And I wanted to add it to this list about real situations for the following reason. When I was doing research for this video, one thing I found was that there was a very popular piece of chainmail known as the Stella Awards email. It was basically like a text chain copy pasta email that you would share around of the craziest lawsuits or the Stella Awards. Why they call it the Stella Awards is something I'll explain in a later section. But basically, there was a huge email that was going around specifically full of 7 frivolous lawsuits that supposedly won. One of the most famous fake stories from this email was the story of the man named Terrence Dickinson from Pennsylvania who broke into a house to burglarize it and went in the garage, but he actually ended up getting stuck in the garage, and because he was trapped in the garage, once he was let out when the family got home from vacation, he sued them and won $500,000. I've personally heard the story through word of mouth, and if you have too, you've been told a lie. But that's not where the situation ends. This piece of chainmail with 7 fake stories isn't just interesting. It's actually manipulative, because it's highly speculated that this fake email chain that was viral during the early 2000s was actually used to help lobby in favor of corporations against the American people. Here's what I mean. During the early 2000s, this viral email chain was going around claiming that these 7 real lawsuits won and that they were crazy and wow, our legal system is so messed up. But right after this Stella Awards email went viral, there was a wave of lobbying that took place on behalf of huge corporations and insurance companies to reform the legal system, specifically involving lawsuits from individuals. And because of this perfect timing, it's highly speculated and borderline confirmed that these 7 fake stories was deliberate propaganda to make the average American individual think that juries in personal injury cases were simply untrustworthy and too frivolous, and because of that, reform needed to happen. And even though these insane frivolous cases not only didn't win money but didn't exist, in the minds of the American people, it seemed like their justice system was just falling apart, and for that reason, it made sense to reform it so that these people weren't able to steal from corporations, when in reality, these corporations and insurance companies were only lobbying to steal your rights. I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, but when doing research for this video, I thought this was too interesting not to include, which is why I wanted to lead you into it with a story that sounds believable and also blood-boiling, but in reality, it's actually corporate American propaganda to steal your rights. Woodrow Thompson versus his neighbor's dog. Woodrow Thomas lived in a nice community in Seattle, Washington, although he had one issue, an issue that he couldn't stand anymore, an issue that most of us can probably relate to. Woodrow's neighbor had a very loud dog. Admittedly, I also have a dog, a small, little, yappy dog that definitely annoys everybody in my neighborhood. And I'm sure a few of you can relate as well. I say this to make the point that loud, barking dogs aren't necessarily a rarity, especially in populated suburban areas. But I guess to Woodrow, the barking had simply gotten too excessive. Denise Norton, Woodrow's neighbor, had a dog named Chopper. And Chopper, according to Woodrow, barked excessively. But Woodrow didn't just claim that Chopper barked excessively, Woodrow claimed that the dog barked to the point of being emotionally and psychologically damaging. Woodrow even went to such extremes as to claim that the dog's barking regularly reached volumes of 128 decibels, which is literally louder than a jet engine. Woodrow was claiming that his neighbor's dog through a window barked louder than a jet engine. So even though Woodrow's entire lawsuit seemed almost baseless and his claims seemed completely unrealistic, he still went ahead with filing the lawsuit against his neighbor. Now here's where things get interesting. As we stated, he was filing this lawsuit specifically for mental and psychological damages. But he didn't just want money for therapy or earplugs. He wanted $500,000 because of Chopper's barking. And this $500,000 lawsuit was won, but not for the reason you think. You see, when Denise Norton was served the papers, letting her know that her crazy neighbor was suing her for $500,000, she almost reasonably didn't take it seriously and just assumed that this lawsuit was fake and that it had no base in reality, so she ignored it. But unfortunately, because she never showed up in court to defend herself, Woodrow automatically won, and the judgment was the full $500,000. Because Woodrow's complaint about the barking dog was unchallenged, well, he just won by default, and he honestly probably wished he asked for more money at that point. But for Denise, the situation is devastating, because although it was definitely negligent of her to not take action on a lawsuit that was handed to her, if it's baseless, then simply challenge it and win. She would have had a very easy win here, mainly because no dogs bark louder than jet engines. But now she is trying to go through the process of having the entire situation appealed and dismissed. And right now, that is still pending. But even though $500,000 is a lot of money, it's not the most we're going to discuss on this list by a mile. Stella Liebeck versus McDonald's. Remember earlier in the plot twist when I was talking about the Stella Awards, basically the lawsuit version of the Darwin Awards? Well, the Stella Awards are named after Stella Liebeck. And the story of Stella Liebeck is one you've probably heard before. But in case you're unfamiliar, let me paint the picture. Stella Liebeck was a 79-year-old woman at the time. She was going about her normal morning routine when she drove to McDonald's, went through the drive-thru, got a coffee, and after she paid and received her coffee, she then put it between her legs, opened it, and began to drive off. But when she drove off, the coffee spilt, and she ended up receiving third-degree burns to over 16% of her body, specifically her inner thighs and groin area. And because of this, she was hospitalized for 8 days and required skin grafts. Now, originally, this case was more or less oversimplified and kind of written off as a baseless claim from somebody trying to get a paycheck. But after doing more digging, I actually kind of don't think it was that at all. But I wanted to add it because I know a lot of people think it was, and I kind of wanted to dispel that myth, or at least maybe let you make your own opinion on it. Because here are the facts. Yes, Stella bought a coffee. Yes, she put it between her legs while driving and opened it. And yes, because of this, it spilt and burned her. All of those actions were definitely not smart. So for those reasons, I definitely think that Stella played a part in this, and maybe if things would have went worse, would have been a Darwin Award winner. But here's the other side of the situation. At the time, McDonald's was serving unreasonably hot coffee, and this was proven. After Stella ended up suing McDonald's because of the intense pain and damages that her body suffered, they measured the temperatures of McDonald's coffees, and they found that these coffees were anywhere from 180 to 190 Fahrenheit, which is far above safe levels or even what any other reasonable coffee shop was brewing or serving coffee at. And that alone gave Stella's case a lot of validity. But it didn't end there, because after lawyers continued to do a deeper investigation into McDonald's hot coffee, they had discovered that over the years, McDonald's had over 700 complaints of people who have injured themselves due to McDonald's extraordinarily hot coffee. So because McDonald's was serving unreasonably hot coffee, and because hundreds of people had not only injured themselves with the coffee, but also had similar settlements with McDonald's, there was definitely a case to be made here. But this is still really only the beginning, because initially, Stella only wanted $20,000 to cover her medical bills, which is reasonable and also kind of dispels the myth that she was looking for a fat paycheck. She wasn't. She just wanted her medical bills to be covered. But McDonald's responded with, I'm not even joking, an $800 offer. Obviously, Stella was unwilling to accept this, and the jury ended up awarding $200,000 to Stella in damages, which the judge brought down to $160,000 due to Stella's partial fault in the situation. But on top of that $100,000 $260,000, Stella was also awarded $2.7 million in punitive damages. And the reason why this figure is significant is because it was equivalent to 2 days of McDonald's coffee revenue. And with that, in total, Stella won $2.86 million. And of course, she didn't walk away with every single penny of it because of legal fees and taxes, but she still did extremely well in a situation that was unfortunate. But yeah, I wanted to mention this one because I think a lot of people were expecting it. I also think a lot of people are uninformed in the situation. Obviously, Stella was not being very wise in this situation. And although her poor choices ended up giving her great bodily harm, this entire situation did likely end up saving a lot of other people in the future, because after this situation, McDonald's reduced the temperature of their coffee to a reasonable temperature. And they were also held accountable and ultimately punished for offering only $800 in the entire situation. I don't think this was a money grab at all. I think Stella just wanted to be compensated for her damages. I think that she was definitely at fault for hurting herself, but I do think that it wasn't only her fault, because if the coffee was a more regular temperature, she would have not have had burns so severe they required literal skin grafts. James Hausman versus a glass door. James R. Hausman lived a simple life in Springfield, Illinois, but he had a dream. He had the dream of sailing the entire world on a cruise ship. And this was a dream that was just about to materialize, and he was doing it on a Holland America cruise. And today was the day. He appeared at the port, stepped on the cruise ship, and began traveling the 7 seas. His cruise was going well so far. He was enjoying every aspect of cruise ship life. You know, shuffleboard with old people, lunch with old people, dinner with old people, dancing with old people, bathing with old people. You know, all of the standard luxuries that a cruise ship can offer. Until one fateful day. The cruise ship that James was on had glass doors. Nothing surprising. But the glass doors on this cruise ship were automatic. And on one fateful day, when James was walking through one of the glass doors on this Holland America cruise, James was hit in the head by a glass door. As the story goes, he was simply walking through the doorway, the door was closing too fast, and it hit him in the head, causing him permanent brain damage. Here's what's interesting. After the incident where James was struck in the head by this automatic glass door, he was still able to carry out his entire 280-day world cruise. But it's reported that his brain injury left him prone to vertigo and small seizures, which are life-changing. When James initially sued the Holland America Cruise Company, the company accused Hausman of carelessly walking into the door and claimed that the incident was anomalous and not their fault. However, that's not what the jury thought. We're obviously going up in money, so it's more than the last one, but guess how much money he won? Do you have your guess? Okay. He won $21.5 million, which is absolutely insane. And I just want to say, I don't think that James was necessarily being dumb or crazy or frivolous in this exact situation. But I think the fact that such a simple mistake could cause such a huge payout is ridiculous in my opinion, which is why I thought it was worthy of this list. Although I want to make it clear, I don't think it was wrong of James to sue. If the door is faulty or too fast, or at least fast enough to cause permanent brain damage, I definitely think there's a reason to, seek compensation. But that being said, $21.5 million seems like a lot. I think this is kind of similar to the last case where there's negligence on both sides. And possibly this situation exposed the underlying issue with these glass doors that were automatic and potentially too fast or, too dangerous. Maroof Hussain versus the Metropolitan Transit Authority. Maroof Hussain was born in Bangladesh and grew up surrounded by family and friends, but as a young adult, wanted to find a better life for himself. And he decided the best place to do that was in the United States of America. Maroof ended up moving to America, and at the age of 24, found himself as a bicycle delivery driver, working right downtown in New York City. Maroof lived a simple and ordinary life until one day of June 2017. Maroof actually had this day off and was going to another part of the city. Like most New Yorkers, he went down to the subway and was waiting on the station. But while Maroof was waiting for his train, he found himself pacing, but unfortunately found himself walking across some uneven ground, which made him feel unbalanced and caused him to fall directly on the subway tracks, the same subway that he was just waiting for. With almost no time to move and no opportunity for somebody to help, Maroof was hit by the subway, but fortunately did live, although sustaining serious injuries. Maroof had injuries to his neck, his back, his head, his arms, his legs, his hands, and the most severe of his injuries were his left foot, where all of his toes were cut off by the train. But here's where things get interesting. When first responders made it to the scene to start seeing Maroof, they assumed that he had intentionally jumped in front of the train. And because first responders had made this official claim, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, or the MTA, which I'm just going to refer to them as now, ran with this as their defense. And because they were trying to state that Maroof did this to himself, they were pressuring Maroof to settle for only $100,000. Now, Maroof was fighting an uphill battle, because not only was he permanently injured because he fell in front of the subway and was struck by it, but now he also had to prove that he didn't do it on purpose. And I think once again, I just wanted to make the point right here, this entry isn't on the list because I think Maroof's crazy or dumb or frivolous or at fault, but I think this entire situation is very dumb, crazy, and frivolous, specifically on the side of the MTA, and I thought it was still worth having it on this specific list. more or less to have a happy and satisfying ending, but we'll get there. Like I said, this entire situation took place in 2017, and it took Maroof years to fight against the MTA and their bullying and their coercion for them to just take the $100,000 offer, but he remained consistent and vigilant. And because he didn't just quickly settle for $100,000, life-changing money in a lot of circumstances, he truly won big. How big, you may ask? Well, he won just under $23 million, or roughly $4.5 million per missing toe, if you're keeping track. But yeah, the jury found the MTA completely responsible and negligent to the fact that they could have implemented additional safeguards, but didn't. And because of this, Maroof was 5 toes poorer and nearly $23 million richer. And it just goes to show, if a company's willing to throw $100,000 at you just to shut you up, it's probably because they know that your case is strong and worth a lot more. Just look at Stella's case. She only wanted $20,000, but McDonald's literally only slapped her in the face with an $800 settlement offer. But because of their severe greed, they ended up paying millions because they couldn't have just honored her medical bills for the coffee that they made too hot. And in this case, if Maroof had just taken the $100,000 and settled and didn't want to fight for himself, well, he would have missed out on tens of millions of dollars. So I guess it goes to show, make sure you advocate for yourself, make sure you stand up, and make sure if you're thrown a lowball offer, you reject it and get what you're worth. Maroof was only seeking $20 million, which is a lot, but they probably could have offered him maybe $5 to settle today, and he probably would have taken it. That's still $1 million per toe. Not a bad deal.